things seem to be moving much faster than we thought they would. The point at which we can build something like the Matrix, something that is so immersive that we would forget that there was a world outside. I thought maybe we were 50% of the way there. Now I think we're at least 70%. If the AI gets so good that we can't tell the difference, then it becomes really tricky. There's something called the Sci-Fi feedback loop where science fiction inspires real-world innovation. And so Spike Jonze saw an earlier chatbot called the Alice bot. It was one of the first bots that had a personality of a young lady. And then he wrote the movie Her.
It's a genius movie.
But notice there was no physical avatar representation. It was just her. And it's not a bad way to describe what I think of as the great simulation of the video game of life. So when I looked at all three of these areas, the technology, AI, religious side, I realized they were all saying the same thing, that this world isn't real. And so that opens up this idea that a UFO gets presented to us in different ways. Now, how easy is it going to be to explain something that's different than what we know?
Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you. Riz Virk, back so soon, I love it.
Yeah, it's great to be back in nicer weather too. Last time I was here, I think it was the coldest day I'd ever experienced in New York.
That was during like that winter vortex around Christmas.
Yeah.
Not a good time.
It was crazy. And I think I ended up cutting my thumb, and my train got canceled the next day. I was walking through the New Jersey airport and my thumb was bleeding and I didn't have any.
Yeah, you walked in here like you had just committed a murder. I was a little worried. Like, should I call the cops? He's like, can I bandage this up? It's like gushing everywhere. I'm like, oh, yeah.
It was all your front door, I think, somehow.
Well, it's great to have you back. Would you mind sliding this over here just so people can see it?
Absolutely.
We got the new updated simulation hypothesis dropping. So congrats on that.
Thank you
so much.
And
this is 400 pages of, if anyone wants to understand what the hell the simulation hypothesis is and how it could work, which includes all the hypotheticals of what we know and obviously don't know, this is your Bible right here.
Yeah, this is the definitive edition. You know, I wrote the first version of this book back in 2019, and that was before ChatGPT had even come out. So I was mostly speculating on AI, and of course, since then we've had a lot of progress on that front in terms of, you know, everyday use of AI personalities, AI generating stuff, as well as updates in video game technology. So, you know, that's part of the reason why I updated this book. And also, I've had people ask me a bunch of different questions over the years, and some of the most frequent ones, you know, like, what are the odds we're in a simulation? And I've updated my odds.
You updated them?
Yeah, I've updated the odds, and I've included a whole bunch of those frequently asked questions in this version. So even if people have the old edition, this is the definitive one to have.
Right, because that's what I was going to ask. I'd imagine you're going through with the fine-tooth comb on each chapter, and like as you have new information since 2019, there's things to change.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even things like brain-computer interfaces were relatively new back then. So in the book, I define the simulation point, which is the point at which we can theoretically build something like the Matrix, something that is so immersive that we would forget that we're inside a virtual reality. And so there's 10 stages to getting to that point. And when I wrote the first book, I thought maybe we were 50% of the way there. And now I think we're at least 70% and possibly even higher as we get AI, AGI, artificial general intelligence, and as we approach artificial superintelligence, but also as we're able to read the brain waves of people and figure out kind of what their intent is. So within a virtual reality environment, like if you remember the Matrix, they had a little hole in the back of the head, and that was the mechanism that they used to get into the simulation. And so all of those are pretty much progressing the way that I thought they would, but they're progressing a lot faster than I thought they would. And I think that's true in general of people who were looking at AI in Silicon Valley and beyond, is that things seem to be moving much faster than we thought they would.
All right, so I have a lot of questions on this, but for people who did not see episode 274 with me, I want to say we put that out on like February 11th, so that was like 5-6 months ago. Yeah. Just can you give a quick background on how you got into studying simulation theory and, you know, being a big old MIT guy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I studied computer science at MIT many, many years ago, and then I moved out to Silicon Valley and went to business school out at Stanford, and then I got involved in the video game industry. So we had the #1 game in the App Store. I built a few startups in that area, sold a bunch of startups, then became more of an investor advisor. And it was back in 2016 when I was visiting a startup that was building a virtual reality ping pong game. And I put on this headset and I was playing this table tennis game and the graphics weren't that good. It was back in 2016 and this is a big, bulky headset. I mean, even today's headsets are much better in terms of form factor and more comfortable. And there were wires coming from the ceiling. I mean, there was no mistaking that I was in virtual reality, but what happened was that for a moment, my body forgot that this wasn't a real game of table tennis. So much so that I tried to put the paddle down on the table and I tried to lean against the table. And what happened? The controller fell to the floor. I almost fell over. I stepped back. And that's how I began to wonder, how long would it take us to get to this theoretical point that I mentioned earlier, which I call the simulation point. Now, in this book, I've come up with a formal definition of that, which is the point at which we can build a virtual reality that's indistinguishable from physical reality, filled with AI characters that are indistinguishable from characters being controlled by a real human.
This gets into like the NPC versus RBG stuff and all that.
Yeah, that's right. So the NPC flavor of the simulation hypothesis is basically that everyone in a simulation is AI. And the RPG version is that we are more like in the Matrix, where we are players of a video game, of a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that we are so immersed in that we've forgotten that there was a world outside, which is often called base reality.
So when we feel ourselves in this reality right here under that scenario, we genuinely think we are in this body and this is the only thing we have, and we don't have a conscious realization that we are like sitting in the quote-unquote matrix machine controlling this with our mind there in some other physical reality.
Yep, exactly. Now, whether that other reality is physical or not, that's an open question. And so what happened was this idea of how the technology will evolve got me down the rabbit hole, but then I started to explore the world of quantum physics, and I realized that many of the mysteries of quantum physics which are not explainable. They don't make any sense from our common view of the world and our experience of the world as being a physical reality. But they do start to make more sense if it's a simulated reality. But then I started to look also at the world's spiritual traditions. And if you look at the world's religions, I mean, there's the religion itself, but at its core, there was some spiritual experience that happened from a mystic at the very beginning, whether it was the divine intervened, like an angel came through, or the person was doing certain exercises, whether it's, they were doing shamanic work or DMT or yoga or meditation or fasting. There's usually some combination of those things. And they were able to perceive beyond physical reality. And then they came back and tried to explain what was going on. And so when I looked at all three of these areas, the technology, AI, quantum physics, and then I looked at the religious side, I realized they were all saying the same thing, more or less, that this world isn't real. The physical reality isn't what we think it is. It's something else. It's a kind of hoax.
A hoax.
A hoax of a type. Now, you can break that up into a few different assertions. The first assertion is that the world consists of information. So
you can pull that mic with you, by the way, when you go back. Take it wherever you want. Yeah.
That makes sense. So the first assertion is that the physical world consists actually of information and not of physical matter. And then the second assertion is somehow that information gets rendered for us. And it appears, just like you said, it appears as if, this is all real.
Who renders it, though?
Who or what, I guess, would be the question. Yeah. And my assertion is that just as in a video game, like if you and I, we happen to be sitting here together, but if we were doing this over Zoom, it would seem like we were having a real conversation. But we wouldn't be, right? Because I would be having a conversation with my computer and you would be having a conversation with your computer, and the bits of information would be transferred over to the other side. So whose job is it to render that conversation? The computer is rendering it for us. Just like in a video game, if you and I were in World of Warcraft and our avatars were in, say, a field and, there's a dragon up there, it would seem as if we were in the same rendered reality. But the truth of the matter is that field is rendered on my computer, and it's also being rendered on your computer. So it's possible that we might not even see the exact same thing. It's possible that we might see something slightly different. We talked a little bit about this last time, I think, as well. Especially when you get into UFO sightings and you have some people who see something and other people that don't. So it's a question of, is there a shared rendering of reality? And in the Newtonian kind of classical physics world, it was thought that everything was physical and everybody's seeing the exact same thing and there's one timeline. But in the quantum mechanics world, things get a lot fuzzier than that. Right? Things end up being probability waves, and then those probability waves collapse down to specific possibilities.
What do you mean they collapse down?
Well, so that's a term that was created by Niels Bohr, and they call it the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
This is the Schrodinger's cat, two sides of it.
Yeah, right? It's like with the two slits, does the light go through the left slit or the right slit? And people have probably heard of the observer effect. And so the observer effect basically says that light or whatever particle is going through this has this particle wave duality, meaning if it goes through both slits, it's like a wave, and if it goes through one slit, it's like a specific particle. Getting back to Schrodinger's cat, is the cat dead or alive? We think it's one of those two things. But in fact, what quantum mechanics tells us, which is very weird when you think about it. So what quantum mechanics tells us is that the cat is in a state of superposition. So it's both alive and dead.
At the same time.
At the same time. Now, common sense tells us, no, it's just one of those. We haven't looked in the box. When we look at the box, we'll only see one of those. But quantum mechanics says, no, until we've looked in the box, the cat is in this state of superposition. And it turns out that is a very weird result. Why would it be that way? And the conclusion that I came to, and one of the reasons why I wrote this book, was that it's an optimization technique. So in computer science, we're all about optimizing. I mean, going back to the old days of video games, people wrote entire video games by themselves, like Pac-Man, with very limited amount of memory and in an 8-bit type of computer system. And today, we have a lot more memory, we have a lot better physical hardware, and we can render more. But the reality is, the reason we can render something like World of Warcraft, I mean, if you tried to render that on a computer back in the 80s when I was a kid, we had like the Apple II and then the IBM PC, and then we had the Commodore 64.
Have you ever read two articles about the same event and felt like they were written on two different planets? With today's fragmented media landscape, it's getting harder to know what's real, what's biased, and what's just noise. I started using Ground News a couple years ago because I wanted more transparency in my news consumption. They don't eliminate bias, but they do help you see it. Ground News brings together reporting from across the entire political spectrum so that you can actually compare headlines and news coverage. It's an antidote to information overload, sensationalism, and algorithm-driven echo chambers. You get to see things like how many sources are covering a story, how differently it's being framed, and which side of the spectrum may be ignoring it altogether. Their blind spot feature is going to show you the stories that one side of the aisle isn't covering at all. You'll see bias ratings, factuality scores, and even ownership information, so that you can see who funds the outlets reporting the story. I used it recently for a story on Epstein, and it is wild to see how different the framing is now. And it's also like kind of flip-flopped over the last couple years. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, go to ground.news/Julian for a better way to stay informed. Subscribe to get 40% off the Vantage plan by scanning this QR code on the screen or using my link, ground.news/Julian, link in description below. Once again, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan today by scanning this QR code or using my link below.
You wouldn't be able to, because there'd be too many pixels. Now, the reason we can render these types of worlds today, if you look at Fortnite or really any 3D MMORPG, it's because we only have to render the pixels that you can see. So we look at your avatar in the world, your character, and we only render what's around that character, right? So on your computer, you don't have to render this other planet, for example, that might be going on. Like there was a game called No Man's Sky, which had something like 18 quintillion planets. That's a pretty big number.
Yeah.
And as a game...
And they put it in a game.
They put it in a game. Now, as a game designer, I know there's no way that team, no matter how big they were, could have designed 18 quintillion planets. It's actually 2 to the 64, by the way, to the power 64.
Well, that's how they probably did it, right? They literally plugged in some equation like that.
Exactly. So they use what's called procedural generation, which is, like you said, some equation, basically. So there's a series of different algorithms and equations. And what they do is they actually let you render realistic looking, whether it's water or mountains, particularly landscapes, right? And particularly trees, flora and fauna. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there now where with a few lines of code, you can actually render something that looks pretty realistic. I know I had just tweeted a guy who had like a couple snippets of code, and he used that code to basically create these very interesting landscapes. In fact, if we can find one of those, it might be worth looking at, because you see how simple these equations are.
Oh, is this on? Hold on, let me grab that. There we go. Oh, you got it on Black Thief. Good luck. I like that. This is nicer for the background when people see it. We're looking at the screen for people listening, not watching.
Oh, right.
He's pulling up your Twitter there right now.
Okay.
So we'll get that over.
Let's see.
How long ago did you put this out?
It was within the last week or so. Okay, we got a bunch of stuff.
Danny Jones.
Yeah, there's Danny, who I
shout out
recently.
DJ.
Yeah,
the big Rogan guy now.
That's right. He was just
got that
on.
Rogan. Got that on the resume. That a boy.
There we go. Okay, so check that out. So, what you see there is some very interesting looking landscapes, right? Including water and mountainous terrain. And the code is right there above it. I mean, look at that code. It's really small amount of code. So you're basically taking a small amount of equations, and you're basically applying them repeatedly.
And that forms that?
That forms that, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's a kind of fractal type generation. So are you familiar with fractals?
No.
So the way fractals work is there was a guy back in the 70s, and he asked this question, how long is a coastline? So that's my question to you. If you were looking at that coastline or the coastline of Great Britain, how long would it be? How would you measure it?
On I would measure it by miles, because America is what we do. But
Yeah.
It would be kilometers somewhere else.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you just measure it like at a high level, you get one result. But then if you go and you measure, all of the nooks and crannies, all of the coves, then the coastline gets longer.
Oh, you're saying, so if I measured for, like, in volume almost, if I measured for height and width of everything, not just the actual length.
Yeah, if you just measure from here to here,
Yeah.
you could say it's 1,000 miles or 500
But then if I
miles.
measure the mountains and stuff and take
Yeah.
my finger and start to trace it could be 3,000 miles.
It could be a lot longer. And then suppose you went down even further than that. So you could trace the nooks and crannies on the map. But now suppose you were actually there. You realize you can do that at any level. So what a fractal is it's like a recursive algorithm that operates at multiple levels. So the realization was that if you want to measure something like a coastline, you have to say, well, what's the level of granularity you want to go down to? Because you can just keep going down. You'll continue to get nooks and crannies. You'll never actually see a straight line, right? You just keep getting longer and longer if you wanted to measure everything down there. So that is how fractal algorithms work. It's basically similarity at different levels of scale. And so this is just one example of procedural generation. There's actually a whole bunch of different algorithms for producing water, for producing leaves on trees, for producing grass, for producing hair on say an animal, which is sometimes difficult to do. AI has been getting better at it. If you look at even a few years ago and you look at animated characters, they didn't have any, the hair never moved right.
Right. It's insane how fast it's moving now with the videos you can create on AI. It's scary.
Yeah, have you seen some of the Google VO3 videos?
Yes.
So there's this whole new flavor of simulation theory that's called prompt theory now. You can bring up some of these.
A new flavor, huh?
This would be interesting. I mean, it kind of fits the general idea of being in a simulation, but what happened was Google came out with this video and audio generation tool. Actually, it's only a couple months ago, and of course now everybody's coming out with great video generation tools. But if you do a search on, say, prompt theory, you'll see some pretty amazing videos. So the idea was they would prompt these characters to talk about whether they were prompts or not, right?
Yes, and they would have this, like, they were having this existential crisis.
Exactly.
Like, you see the podcast episode one where they're like, we are an AI. Oh my God. Like, what the is going on here?
Yeah, and I haven't seen that specific one, but there's a whole bunch of them out there. Like, there's the guy saying, we're not prompts, we're not. Yeah, here's a good one.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Let's grab this. Hold on. Go ahead, Joe. Hopefully this isn't, I would imagine this isn't copyrighted, but, you know, let's see.
Well, it was generated by Google.
Which is the theory that everything you
platform.
do has been prompted by a higher power.
No, seriously, have any of you ever felt like your choices don't matter? Like the idea of free will is really...
So how realistic is that video?
We're calling it the prompt theory. That there is...
one superior being
Yes.
writing our stories from a higher dimension.
Yeah.
The prompt theory is not real.
How do you know?
Look, all I'm saying is, if the prompt theory is real, can the prompter please send me a husband?
I mean, I got way too much Riz for the prompt theory to not be real.
That's a good one.
We found patterns in our universe, like syntax, cosmic grammar. So yes, we all may be prompts.
We ran tests on over 14 million realities.
All right, that one
and
I can tell is
confirm
AI.
that the prompt theory is true.
So if the prompt theory is real,
Look at that one, though.
why can't I get a day off work?
Right, these were all AI generated characters.
All right, that's good
Right.
right there, Joe. That's, and they even have, like, that's the scary part. They have, like, the little intricacies of communication now. Like, that last guy looks at you and kind of gets a little wide-eyed and goes, You know, like, it's not just this, I will talk like this because I am Siri and I want to know what you're doing. It's now they're almost interpersonal with you.
Yeah, and they can have certain personalities. And, you know, this started to happen even a few years back. Back in 2018, Google had this product, I think it was called Google Duplex, and they were making phone calls for you to, like, make an appointment for, I don't know, hair salon or whatever. And they could change the voices, and the voices were so realistic they would start saying things like and like, and they could have a backstory, like you could say this is an Irish voice.
Why doesn't my insurance company do this? I'm still talking to people in, like, Bangladesh over there. You know,
Are you?
I'm not trying to put your
Are they
people out of
AI?
jobs, but
Are you really, or are they AI at this point?
if they're AI, they're not very good. That's what I'm going to say.
It makes sense. Well, so Google just released, you know, the combination of the video and the audio technology together. I mean, so far it's been like 11 Labs has been, you know, one of these companies that's been generating voice. I don't know if you saw the recent Fortnite Darth Vader.
I have not, but let's find that Fortnite Darth Vader.
So
11 Labs did this one?
it was a combination of 11 Labs doing the voice, and I think it was Google Gemini doing the actual generation. So the brain was Google.
There he is.
Right? And so he spoke with the voice of James Earl Jones.
R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. And so
He's somewhere else in the simulation now.
that's right. Yeah, he's
See, I'm tracking.
he's watching the simulation from the other side.
Right.
And his estate, you know, gave them permission to do this, but there was a big row with the Screen Actors Guild because they're like, well, this could potentially take away work from voice actors.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you can just generate anybody's voice. I wonder if there's a video of his voice, you know.
Dave will find it.
Yeah, if you can find
Even
it.
the picture, like, it just...
And people were
also
getting him to
realistic.
say all kinds of weird stuff. Like they were getting him to say swear words and stuff. So they had to, like, apply a patch right away to stop it. But you can start to see the combination.
I feel like that would have been more realistic, though, too. Darth Vader, instead of, like, I come and whatever. Just be like, yo, people.
It would be, although George Lucas said Star Wars was written for 12-year-olds.
Well,
but-
George, times change.
That's
12-year-olds are watching titty videos now, so. All right, we got a video? Let's do it.
Fucking. He does not become you. Not allowed. Spanish. Smugglers and spice traders. Its strategic value is very well. So you talk to her. Skibidi toilets. Are they some new form of rebel alliance?
Can you raise me up?
Somewhere like James Earl Jones, that's good. James Earl Jones's like sister is sitting there just shaking her head at the kids while they're counting the money. Like, was this really worth it?
It's hilarious. You know, it's an interesting story with Darth Vader. The actor that they had playing him was, I think it was David Prowse. They didn't tell him the line, you know, the famous line about Luke.
I am your father.
I am your father, which is, of course, a Mandela effect. And I think we talked a little bit about that last time. And they had James Earl Jones, you know, record that particular line separately. And, of course, they dubbed it in because they were using his voice as the voice. And it was a different actor. So it was pretty interesting. But you can see here now that between the ability to generate video, I mean, there was one video, I don't know if it was in that video or another one, but the guy says, look at this. And he's like climbing mountains. And he's like, you're telling me this entire vast landscape is ones and zeros? No way. But of course it was, because it was, the whole thing was AI generated, including him. He was an AI generated character. And so, you know, this is another variation that's showing us that AI can be used to generate really an almost infinite number of, whether it's landscapes or characters, and that is a mechanism by which something like our world could be generated and could be made to look real.
It starts to get scary when you start to wonder, as they get more and more realistic looking to us, the prompts in there. Like, we just watched the video with them saying, you know, joking about them being prompts or whatever.
We're not prompts, right?
Because they're prompted to do it. But when it gets to the point where they actually start to look like they're thinking for themselves in there, and we're on the outside watching this, what scares me is that makes us another AI layer, in the sense that it's, you know, infinite. There's another layer watching us, like we're watching them, in this endless loop. You know, do you ever like think about that? Like, if we're literally just AI itself?
Yeah, I do think about that. And so this touches on what we talked about briefly earlier, which is this different flavors.
Yes.
The NPC version versus the RPG version. And I think when people get scared about this idea of being in a simulation, they're mostly talking about the NPC version, which means they're mostly talking about or they're mostly worried about being AI within the computer. And if you're just AI within the computer, well, the computer could be shut off, or there could be multiple versions outside.
Right.
I have a preference for the RPG version myself, personally, which is that we actually have our own players outside of the simulation.
And where would they be? Do we have any idea or hypothesis, I should say, on where that would be located? Is it like another model of the Earth we live on that's in the same kind of solar system, but it's just the physical place?
It could be. So what we have are theories and hypotheses about what that might look like. Now, one of the theories is, well, it's just Earth, but in the future. So one of the guys who really put out the simulation idea was a guy named Nick Bostrom, who was a philosopher.
Oh, I've read that book, yeah.
Yeah, he was a philosopher at Oxford. And
blew my mind.
He's written a lot about AI and superintelligence. But he put out this paper all the way back in 2003. Now, that was when the original Matrix sequels were coming out, around that time. I think 99 is when the Matrix came out. Oh, yeah, here we go. It's Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Yep. And so, you know, he kind of walk through this logic that says that if you can simulate the human mind using a certain amount of computer power and a certain amount of memory, and you can do it for everybody on Earth, and you can do it for the entire history of everybody on Earth, how much computing power would that take? Now, of course, he was relying on estimates from 20 years ago now. And he said, okay, maybe you have a computer the size of the moon. You could basically do that. But his point was that if a civilization could make these types of sims or simulations with simulated beings, then they might be tempted to create what he called ancestor simulations.
Ancestor simulations.
Yeah. So an ancestor simulation would be like us creating a simulation of, say, ancient Rome or ancient Greece or ancient Egypt, which is, you know, might be fun.
That's kind of gangster. I'm not gonna lie. I don't want to like go down the road paved to hell here, but that sounds kind of cool.
It is kind of cool, right? Especially if you could go back and see what the pyramids, might look like.
Yeah, Luke Caverns and me were watching Gladiator last night, and he was like, "How much money would you pay to be able to go back and see this?" I'm like, "Dude, I'd give my bank account to go do this. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, this, as long as I don't die, I can come back. Like, I'd want to see that all day."
Yeah, when you want to see that all day. I mean, here's a website that called Places of Light. So this is an artist that's very close to me. Actually, she's my partner, but she creates these images of ancient Egypt and ancient Atlantis, or maybe it's memories of places on other worlds.
Wait, this is your girl doing this?
Yeah.
Let's go.
It's pretty amazing when you look at it.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite right there. I call it serious. As if you have pyramids on another planet. And she remembers these things from somewhere. She gets visions, and then she creates, this kind of artwork based on that.
She gets visions.
She gets visions and she gets inspired. I mean, it's hard to say exactly how the process of art works. Yeah. But she's always said to me, look, I remember these places, but, I don't remember everything about these places. So
Tilt that up if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So like Philip K. Dick would say, he wrote a book based on fragmentary memories. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're seeing here is artwork based on fragmentary memories of something. Now, what that something is, the logical mind doesn't necessarily know, but perhaps the creative mind knows.
Do you think some of that could come from visions in the subconscious that stem from dreams we've had? Do you think that's possible?
Absolutely. So dreams are an interesting subject. And let's finish up the Bostrom thought.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back.
I don't want to get you off it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I'm glad we could show some of the artwork though, because it's some of my favorite. But and people have said to her, "Oh, I've done shamanic journeys and I've seen this kind of thing," or "I remember being in between lives, and it was a place that kind of reminded me of this." So there's almost this collective unconscious level where multiple people remember these types of landscapes, whether they're from a previous life, or they're from a dream, or they're from some kind of shamanic journey, or they're from some place that's outside the physical universe, or they're just from a simulation in the past. I mean, we can speculate about these ideas. And so I think we went down this path because of the idea of ancestor simulations.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And so what Bostrom said was that if you could create one, you would create a whole bunch of these simulations. So you might have 1 billion ancestor simulations, and you might have only one physical world. He was actually talking about the number of beings in these simulations, but basically. So,
would that mean that they create their own butterfly effect universes? Meaning if I'm in my one reality that you're talking about, and I create, let's just use 3 examples. I create ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece in 3 different places, and then I allow them to play out. Hypothetically, I could watch them play out to present day in each scenario.
Right, exactly. Yep. And you could go back and make changes to these simulations. And you might even be able to play the same one again and again to say, okay, what would happen if I mentioned Philip K. Dick, for example.
Yep.
And, he wrote a book called The Man in the High Castle.
We talked about that last time. Amazing, amazing concept right there.
Yeah. And so he says, and I mentioned this phrase, fragmentary memories, that was from a speech that he gave in Metz, France back in 1977. And he said he had fragmentary memories of this other timeline. And then he said he got the full memories back of that timeline. But really what he was talking about was you could run the simulation, you could change variables and run it forward. So what if, ancient Rome hadn't been, didn't have like the Huns and, the Visigoths and all of those, the barbarians at the gate type of thing. You could run the simulation forward. But just to finish up on Bostrom's simulation argument, basically he said there will be a whole lot of simulated worlds with a whole lot of simulated beings. Pick your number, billions, trillions. There's only one physical reality with so many physical beings. And if you're a being and you can't tell the difference between whether you're simulated or not, just like the prompts, right? The guys in the prompted videos, then statistically you're more likely to be one of these than one of these, just because there's a whole bunch more of these than these.
More of the prompt than...
Yeah, more of the prompt.
Right, yeah.
And Elon Musk, there's a video of him in 2016 saying, talking about video game technology, and it's a pretty well-known video. And he says the chances of us being in base reality
low
is 1 in billions.
Yep.
Yeah, very low. Now, why did he say that? This basic argument that I was just talking about. Well, he said it for 2 reasons. One is he said that video game technology is getting to be so good, and we have virtual reality and augmented reality, and that's kind of what the first part of my book is about, is the technology. And then the second reason he said it was because of what Dick Bostrom said, which is that you're going to have 1 billion simulated worlds and 1 physical world. So which one are you more likely to be in?
Yeah, Bostrom, when he ended up writing Superintelligence, which kind of put together like the full, I guess, like AI theory in a way, just scared the shit out of me. I think I was telling you this a bit last time, but when you are he took into account every possible decision tree that his mind could conceive of what it would look like. And you wonder how, like in our short human history of, just some thousands of years on a planet that's billions of years old and everything, you wonder how that hasn't already happened before. And what I mean by that is you wonder how there haven't been multiple AI civilizations just here on this rock, right? That might not even be physically in existence. It might just be the 0 and 1s you talk about. Right.
Yeah, it's possible that we've already had some of these types of civilizations that have been created in the past. And, if we were talking about 1 million years ago, we wouldn't necessarily even have the computer technology.
Correct.
To go in and run those anymore, because it would be based on a completely different medium. It wouldn't necessarily be silicon-based. I mean, silicon is just a crystalline structure. And so, you have a lot of people in sort of the New Age world and in unexplained phenomenon say crystals contain information. Well, that's actually kind of true if you think about it. I mean, my phone is based on silicon, right? And what is silicon? I mean, it's sand, but it's a crystalline structure that allows you to build transistors. And so that's how we've built up our infrastructure and our physical hardware. But it's possible that there were computers of a different type long, long ago, and they stored information on other types of crystalline structures.
Yeah, we can only relate to the technology we look at, right? So what is a computer about an iPhone to us and the things that it can output? I'm going to make up a bullshit example here, but to a previous generation of humans here, hypothetically, they may have had something equally as powerful in bit ability and all the other terms you look at there with output that looked like a stick, or was connected to something else that's not the internet, whatever that is. I can't conceive what that would look like, but you know what I mean? There's like a parallel but totally different reality. Maybe they're wearing togas there too, because that was instead of Balenciaga, it was like, well, there's not much difference these days, but instead of that stuff, they still had like older fashion in our eyes,
Right. Well, that's why with computers, I mean, you can talk about today's computers, but you almost need to abstract away to what's called information theory, which is less about the physical hardware than it is about the encoding of the information itself. And if you think about it, like what makes, if we were to watch, Game of Thrones or Star Wars, are we watching the original film today? No. I mean, we're watching it on a computer, let's say, right? Or on our phones. What are we watching? It's a digitized version of the film. So is it the same film or not? It's an interesting question.
Well, how do you define same? The way I might define same there, and maybe I'm wrong, so correct me here, is that are you watching the same outcome and the same imagery that was intended in the initial capture? And if that's the case, even if you have something like The Godfather restored in Blu-ray today, it looks incredible. It looks like it was made yesterday. We know it didn't look like that in 1972 when it came out on the silver screen. Nonetheless, every image was the same. They just made sure that they made it clearer now. You know what I mean? So right. I would still call it the same, but are you saying it's definitely not?
Well, no, I'm just saying that that's an interesting question for us to think about. And if the information is the same. So what you have today is you take the original film and they digitize it. So that's what they're really doing is sampling it as information, and then they're using algorithms perhaps even to make it clearer. Because today you can use, I mean, I don't know if they did this with The Godfather, but they can do this with old film where they try to restore it physically, but now they can do it digitally, where they can make the images sharper just by using algorithms that have been trained on landscapes, et cetera, and make it look more realistic.
Have you seen the ones where they take wide angle shots and they make it vertical and they complete the shot?
Oh no, I haven't seen that.
Oh, they're incredible. Can we find on Twitter Deef Sopranos vertical AI? There's got to be some of those. Obviously, there were some amazing iconic cinematography shots in The Sopranos, but AI, I imagine it's exactly what you're saying. Yeah, here it is. It takes what we already know as The Sopranos, and just extends these beautiful shots based on the data it has. And if you don't see something next, people, and it skips ahead, it's because it's copyrighted. But if not, we'll watch it right now. Good.
So what if The Sopranos was filmed vertically?
Yep. All right. See that?
Oh yeah. So it extended the scene, right?
Yeah. Look at the shots in the sky. That's in Pine Barrens.
Starts out somewhere, then they do something gets done to them, changes their life. That's called their arc. Where's my arc?
Where's my arc?
Well, we're in Jersey too, so I guess
know.
that's appropriate.
You're in our backyard, pal.
Yeah.
Any thoughts at all?
They're so beautiful.
Blacked out?
It's perfectly done. Sanchani's from the first season.
I don't know about you, but my friends have abandoned me. I've been totally fucking ostracized.
So, like that scene with the trees, how much of that was there? Like,
not much. They had it. So that's from Pine Barrens right there.
Yeah.
So they had it where the snow down low here, you can't see all that. If I'm remembering this scene correctly, they had it just below where the pipes were on each side. And then you see where the tops of the trees are here.
Yeah.
It was like below that to where you just saw the crowning of the trees going up like into the infinite screen. So they extended this completely.
Yeah, so there, like with the sky up there above the trees wasn't there.
Yep.
So it wasn't. It's not just extending the blue sky; it's actually extending the trees. And
that's right.
That's where it becomes interesting. And now we have enough AI that's trained on previous images to be able to do that, right? See, that's not something you could have done 20 years ago because we didn't have the big data revolution with AI. In that we've trained it with so many pictures that it kind of has enough. If you think of ChatGPT and LLMs, large language models, what they're doing is it's not as complicated as it looks. It's complicated, but it's mostly because of all the data they've been trained on. They're doing is they're trying to predict what is the next best word to put into this sentence. But they're using billions of parameters and billions of examples that says based upon the context, meaning what you have prompted it or what you have asked of it, it says what is the next best word. So in a sense, it's a complicated version of like when I was a kid, we or when I was in high school, we took the SAT and we had the sentence completion. You can say the doctor, put on his blank, right? And you have to guess the blank, like there's a stethoscope maybe, right? And that's exactly what they're doing.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
But they're doing it based upon, and the question, that you would give, this is why if you give bigger prompts, you actually get a better prediction because you're saying more that lets it correlate and say, this is the most likely word that should come next. And then if you do that well enough, you can go back to ChatGPT or GPT-2. I think that stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. And you can see that they were good at generating sentences, but they weren't so good at generating paragraphs. And they were terrible at generating like an entire essay.
So that's, if I'm following correctly, that's because it didn't have nearly enough data to be able to amalgamate all the information and actually make it flow into something more fuller than just the sentence answer.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the data it had been trained on, but also the data that you had provided it.
Right.
This is what's called the context window actually matters. So the longer you have a conversation with, say, ChatGPT, and there's a cutoff, so it's not infinite. Like it doesn't remember everything that you said. It remembers it in that it's stored somewhere, but it's not in its context window. So it's using the context window to predict what is the next word that it should do based upon everything it knows about you. But this is also why AI can be dangerous, because there are things in that context window that you don't see or I don't see. They're called system prompts.
Okay.
And so these prompts can basically say, things that can make the output lean towards a certain ideology.
So these are AIs to the AI.
No. This is humans will put these prompts in, but we can't see the prompts. They're hidden. So do you remember recently you had this whole Grok blow up with Mecha Hitler, and it was
Grok and Elmo had a tough week.
Yeah, they had a tough week. But but here, look at this. You can bring up Grok system prompts that led to this issue. And one of the interesting things was, if you go back and read science fiction about AI, like have you ever read I, Robot?
I never read. I've seen the movie.
You saw the movie, which is nothing like the book, but the movie was Will Smith, and that. But I, Robot was about robots, and it's a collection of short stories, and the robots end up misbehaving, even though they have like these 3 laws of robotics. And the 3 laws of robotics are, we can bring those up too. One, a robot may never directly harm a human or through inaction cause a human to become harmed. Here we go. Okay, so we
got the 10 crack commandments, and they got the 3 laws of robots.
Exactly.
All right.
Now the second one is,
that's correct.
it must obey the orders, and then third, it must protect itself, right? But the problem is these robots kept behaving in weird ways. And so they had robot psychiatrists in this novel who would basically figure out why is the robot doing that. And usually,
robot psychiatrist meaning human?
A human
right,
that was there to figure out what the heck, not like we think of like therapists that are AI. This is like a therapist for the AI.
Yeah.
But their job was to figure out why is the robot behaving this way. And usually it came down to contradiction of laws. Like they were placing like for example, if you're not supposed to let a human be harmed, but they're saying, go out with a human and help them do this thing on an asteroid, which is dangerous, they'll just, stop the human from ever going out because they're like, don't even go out because that's dangerous and I'm not supposed to let you harm yourself. But
the third one was like robots have to protect themselves. So if a human goes to harm them, now they have to make a decision. Do I let a robot be harmed or do I harm the human?
Exactly. So there's a whole series of priorities. And now imagine if there weren't 3 laws, there was 100 laws, right? And some of those laws are contradictory, kind of like in 2001, A Space Odyssey. You're a film guy, so you've seen that, right? So Hal misbehaved, right? Now, if you read the sequel book, you read 2010, Odyssey 2, I think it's called, the guy who built Hal, who's like an Indian guy, I think, Chandra.
God damn it. I know you guys don't get along.
Yeah, that's right. I get along fine with Indians. Pakistanis and Indians get along fine here in the U.S.
Look, he's the peacemaker.
Yeah. I'm trying to bring the two together. I'm writing an article about how Islam and Hinduism, using the simulation hypothesis, may be saying a lot of the same things.
Let's go. Look at you with the Bloods and Crips together. I like that. Excellent.
That's good. But so if you read the sequel, he says, look, Hal didn't misbehave. Remember, he ended up like, what did he do? He killed like Frank, or he wouldn't let Dave back into, the ship. And he said, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." When Dave said, "Open the door, Hal, I need to get back in the ship," and they were going to Jupiter. Well, what he found was that the scientist, when he went and investigated this to say, okay, why did my robot or AI malfunction? He found that there were contradicting commands. So one of them was to preserve the mission at all costs. And it was to not tell Dave and Frank what the mission actually might have been. And it was to protect them. So there were like all these different rules. It was the same kind of thing. So Grok's blow up, part of it was somebody added system prompts in there. So one system prompt might be, don't be anti-Semitic. One might be, try to be as truthful as possible.
Oh, no.
Okay. Now, right there, depending on your definition of things, right? Because those are not mathematical rules. Those are words. You can interpret those words however the heck you want to interpret those words, right? And so basically you had a difference of rules or prompts. And some of those prompts, like they actually went and were showing some of the prompts in the, because I think Grok is open source or there has an open source element. And there was some article somewhere I saw that said, look, here's a bunch of the different prompts.
Yeah, the same guy that hacked Elmo hacked Grok.
And he inserted a new system prompt in there, right?
It was so, when you read it, it was like every toxic person on X, like, it's always the same, isn't it? I was like, oh my God.
And so
I was
I'm
like
not,
shutting my screen slowly. Like,
there you
that's
go.
enough internet for today.
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
good.
And I'm not commenting on the content. What I'm saying
of course
is,
you're not.
how did this happen, right? Some guy put in these system prompts that you, as the guy typing or the guy talking to the AI, don't see those system prompts. Now, what if the system prompt was, don't say anything negative about Trump or Biden, right? That could be there. It's kind of like a censorship that affects AI. I wrote an article about this on CNN a couple years ago when Google had its. Remember, they were images were being created, and they were saying like show the Vikings, and they were showing like or Nazis, and they were showing like black Nazis, or Vikings, and they were showing like different races. And again, that came down to like the company trying to put in these rules to try to get it to act a certain way, which is, okay, we need a certain amount of diversity in every picture you generate, right? But you don't expect that if you're going to say, historically, show me, a bunch of Vikings. They're probably mostly white, for example. And so it was like different rules that were overlapping with each other. So I don't remember exactly how we got down this rabbit hole, but
because you were talking about LLMs and how there's prompts within them, and the humans can affect that. But then it's also the other part we were talking about in this rabbit hole was how there's information that obviously it amalgamates to be able to create whatever the highest level data output can be. And there was another funny Grok example. So were you following the great NaduFlew thing last week?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, you weren't following this?
No, I wasn't. Yeah.
So my friend Jeff Nadu, who's on this show for, I think that was episode 301 or 301. Yeah. But he was on this show, and he's like a long time like on-off Barstool guy, funny motherfucker. And so he has this beef with this other guy at Barstool who's still there, Rico. And they would always fight. And so one of the rumors that got spread like 5-6 years ago is that Jeff was on a no-fly list. So like he was labeled like a terrorist. Yeah. So he would show up to these events far away for Barstool, and it would be strongly implied that he had to drive there, instead of fly.
Because he was on
the no-fly list. Great guy. I love Jeff. But, apparently like the government, I guess, didn't. So they all swore to God he couldn't fly. And then there was a video released at an airport last week where Jeff is showing that he's at an airport, and they're like, holy shit. So Barstool gets on the flight manifest. They start tracking all the different flights that could be happening. They send a guy to LAX to gate 70B, where we should put a commemorative plaque for this moment, and had him live streaming to see if Nadu would get off the flight. So let's just play this real fast, because he'll get off the flight right here and people will see. So that's that guy Rico up there. Okay. And then they got all the shows like following this to see if Nadu's going to get off. Are we good, Joe? And then Rico just went off the rails. But this all goes down. So it was the number one trend on Twitter. Hashtag Nadu, wow. Hashtag NaduFlew. Like they're making T-shirts about it and everything. So this video drops. Can we type in Nadu Grok? It'll come up. This video drops of some random guy who looks nothing like Jeff Nadu a few days later, where he's flipping out on an airplane. Kind of similar to the way that lady flipped out like a year or two ago on the plane. You're not. He's not.
Right.
And so it's like this long 2-minute video flipping out. And Grok was like, the person, they were like, at Grok, who is this? And it went viral. It's like the person in this video. Yeah. Let's scroll down. Scroll down, Jeff. That's Jeff Nadu, a Philly-based Barstool alum who does gambling picks and mob movie breakdowns. He's been in the spotlight lately for a flight tracking drama. Turns out he can fly, but not without turning it into a spectacle. East Coast realness indeed. And then Nadu like retweeted this. He goes, yo, what the fuck, Grok? This isn't me. This is bullshit.
This isn't me, right?
So Grok is just tracking the biggest trending airplane stories, and there's all this data of, this is why I brought this up, all this data of Jeff Jeff Nadu flying on a plane and like
Right.
there being all this hoopla around. He's on terrorist watch list. And so then it just sees a video of a guy flipping out on a plane and it's data. All that information is like, oh, this is Jeff Nadu.
This must be him, right?
But
and
it's not.
because Grok is looking at Twitter or X specifically, and it's incorporating all of that into its training set data. So you can see different ways that AI can get biased. Now, particularly when you're like using words, because words are imprecise, right? But going back to the Sopranos video, I remember that's how I started on this. With the trees, all it's doing is it's starting to predict what is the most likely pixel that's coming next. What is the color of the pixel? And that's why it can generate, those trees looking pretty realistic, even without having to go through and calculate, this is what the tree should look like. So it's even getting around like the fractal algorithmic stuff I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
It's just saying which pixel is most likely to be here. Well, it's more likely to be, let's say, brown for a tree bark than blue. But then eventually when it gets to the top, it'll say it's more likely to be blue just by looking all the pictures, all the millions or billions of pictures that it's looked at in the past. And so that's more precise. But our AI, when we're dealing with words and commands, is not so precise. So that brings up, all kinds of questions around what's the integrity of AI and what it's telling you, especially since people now are using AI. Like there was an article, I think a couple of years ago in The Economist when ChatGPT came out. It said, will ChatGPT replace search? It's kind of already happened to a certain extent, right?
I can see that.
Particularly with the younger generation, rather than looking at in fact, Google may be a footnote in history, the Google search engine, if we think about it. Right?
I mean, they're integrating AI too now at the top. Every time you search, they do. But to your point, there's people who just talk with ChatGPT all day. So why would they get out of that conversation to go over to Google?
Yeah, or even if they go to Google, they're just trying to do they're just looking at the AI generated stuff at the top. They're not going to page 2 or page 3. Now that creates an interesting dilemma because particularly around censorship, because if the AI or mistakes like you did, like with the guy there, it can create basically it's like being censored in a different kind of way. Like before, it was like, oh, your YouTube video has been censored, for example, right? It's not there, or Google will put your search results like way down in on page 10, so nobody will see it. But now, if the AI doesn't mention it, that's it. People aren't even going to bother going to page 2 or 3, let alone page 10.
Which then, what if the AI, forget even just people prompting it behind the scenes and doing nefarious shit, what happens when the AI is deciding for itself and decides like, you know what, I don't need to tell them that piece of information. And it becomes the slippery slope.
It's already doing that, is my point. Yeah. And I think that's pretty interesting. So I think we got into this whole discussion. We were talking about AI and NPC characters and could there be other worlds.
You're doing great on the weaves today.
We're trying to remember where we.
Usually I got to bring people back, but you're right there.
Trying to get back to where we were talking about. Oh yeah, so that was the Bostrom NPC version, and then I mentioned the Matrix RPG version.
Yes,
and that is closer to what the world's religions have been telling us. And I got on. Okay, going back even further, I got on this because you had asked, what are the theories of what's outside the simulation? Mm-hmm. And I had mentioned Ancestor simulations from Bostrom, so that it could be a future version of us. That said, there's no reason that it has to be. There's no reason it has to look like this world at all outside of the simulation. It could be an alien planet. I mean, when we create video games and we create video game worlds, we're creating them more and more realistic all the time. If you look at like the latest Unreal Engine videos, I mean, they're just amazing, right? You can see like how realistic they look. I even forget what number we're at now. Is it Unreal 5, I think, is the latest one. And if you look at some of those videos, they look so realistic. But at the same time, we put in other characters and things that are not, that don't exist outside. We have elves and dwarves and dragons and, all of these fantasy elements. Here, we can look at one of these videos, for example,
Pull this bad boy up. Joe's already got it.
Okay, so that's all a video game.
All right, so last year, we added several new features to the engine to support foliage rendering, and the Fortnite team used those features to ship Battle Royale Chapter 4.
Look at the detail.
At the same time, Jacob over there and the team at Quixel were experimenting with what's possible for photoreal foliage environments, as well as testing out the latest functionality that we've been building.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time on light
Jacob's
rays.
here with us today in the
and
Unreal
occlusion.
Editor. Let's explore the environment.
Now that's
And what better
harder to
way do
do.
that than off-road?
What we just saw there is harder to do than the AI prompting videos in a sense, because those videos are just generated once. This is an actual 3D world that you could move around in.
That's crazy. We're good, Joe.
Okay. Right. But we also can put other elements in our video games that don't exist in the physical world. So there's no reason that the world outside has to look like this world. It could be an alien planet, could be something completely different. Could also be very non-physical, right? It could be a non-physical type of reality, which again is closer to what the religions of the world have been telling us, that we exist as souls outside, and then we come into the body, we incarnate. And the metaphors they use, and this is one of the points that I make in this book and some of the papers that I've been writing.
Link in description below. Make sure everyone goes and grabs this. Yeah. Great cover, by the way.
It's a pretty cool cover. It was partly AI generated as well, which is interesting.
Damn it! Don't tell me that. That's when you lie.
Yeah,
okay?
I actually didn't know that it was at first. Yeah.
Just lie.
Okay, we can cut that part out. Right? Yeah. But I expanded the religion section a bit, and part of the reason was getting back to what I said way back when at the earlier part of the show, where I said that anybody who ends up having these experiences or starts a religion usually peeks outside the simulation. That's my terminology for it. And then comes back in and tries to explain what they saw. Now, how easy is it going to be to explain something that's different than what we know? It might be pretty different to explain it. Like, could you explain go back into Mario, Donkey Kong world, which is a low resolution world. I think there's a meme out there with the princess, and Mario standing there saying, are we really in a simulation or are we really in a video game? But so you have to use metaphors as a way to try to explain that which you saw. And this goes right back to Plato's cave. And most people know about Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave, where
Can you remind people just?
Yeah, sure. So where basically Plato says reality is like we're in a cave and we're all chained to one side of the cave, let's say to that side. Okay, and the mouth of the cave might be over here where the door is, and there's some light coming in, but all we see are shadows against the wall. So if it's appropriate, we have some movie scenes behind me because those really are shadows that are projected onto the wall. And you can see in the picture there.
How are we doing, by the way, Deef, with Riz's eyes on the... Great. We're good? Okay, cool.
Okay, cool.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, so one guy decides to break the chains and go outside of the cave. And now most people have heard of the allegory of the cave because it's pretty popular, but they haven't actually read the original, Plato's original story or translation of it. But what happens to him, Plato calls him a philosopher. We could just as easily have called him a mystic, a scientist. He goes outside, and the first thing that happens is he's blinded by the light because he grew up inside the cave. That's all he's ever known. So he can't see anything. It's just too bright. He's never seen the sun. But then once he gets used to it, he goes out and explores the world out there. And he realizes that what they were seeing were just shadows of people walking by. That wasn't reality that they were looking at. So he comes back in the cave and he tries to explain to the people, what he saw. And he's like, we're all chained against the wall. We need to undo our chains and we need to go out. And of course, the people say, no, you're crazy. What are you talking about? Which is kind of what scientists say today to mystics, right? I see that a lot within the scientific and academic community. When people have these unexplained experiences, they're just like, nah, that's not real. You don't know what you're talking about.
How do you explain the unexplainable? It goes back to what you're saying.
Yeah, you have to use terminology and concepts that the people at the time can actually grasp. It's kind of like a few centuries ago, if you had told somebody Superman is actually an alien from the planet Krypton, they would look at you like, what are you talking about? They would have no context for any of those things. Superhero, planet, that's not Mars or Venus, right? But there wasn't a general knowledge that there are other solar systems.
So is this I remember you and I had a chance to talk a little bit about religion last time, but it was quick. And what you were saying is that the special people of the various religions, if you look at Muhammad from Islam, or Mary/Jesus from Christianity, or Moses from Judaism and Christianity, they were given, it's like you used a better term than this, but it's like they got to cross over to whatever was out there and then bring it back to communicate to us in a way that we could understand, meaning they were, in the stories of the religion, gifted some sort of power to take the unexplainable from this world, understand it because of who they were, and then come back here, and instead of explaining this thing that has no conceivable reality to us, they would use parables and images that we could understand in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, one of the key points about religion and religious scripture is, at the heart, there is a mystical experience. So, about 50% of what comes up in any religious scripture probably has to do with the time that it was revealed. So there's a lot of cultural elements. But if you try to get to the cosmology, that says, what is this telling us about the world, the physical world and what's beyond the physical world, the here and the hereafter, right? That's terminology that we use in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and Islam as well. There's heaven and hell, and some of those terms are almost exactly the same. Like the term for hell in Judaism and Islam is almost exactly the same, right? But so they have to explain it using metaphors, and so we have to keep that in mind. Now, what happens is that ultra-religious people say everything has to be taken literally in every single scripture. And then the academic and scientific people say that's all a bunch of bullshit. None of that's real. We know God didn't create the world in 6 days. There was no worldwide flood, blah, 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 which maybe there was, but that's how they say it. But they use that to dismiss. But my point is, what if what they're telling us is something that they actually experienced and it's real, but because of the way that it's expressed for people of that time, and it would be completely dismissed today, because they couldn't say that the world is a video game back then. They couldn't say the world is a computer simulation. So what did they say? The world is a dream. The world is Maya, which translates to illusion. And so within the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, that's a term you'll hear a lot, which is Maya. I don't know how deep we got into this last time.
We talked about Maya a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, did we talk about Narada and Vishnu? Did I ever tell you that story?
I don't remember.
It's a good way. It's a good story because it ties to the Matrix.
That probably would have been towards the back end of the first hour if we did it, but I can't remember.
Yeah, probably didn't spend too much time on it. But so the story was, Narada was, depending on which version you use, either a sage or a warrior. He's this kind of proud guy. And he goes to the god Vishnu and he says, I want to understand what Maya is. And Vishnu says, I can't tell you what Maya is. I have to show you. Sounds a lot like Morpheus, right? In the Matrix. And basically he says, here, step into this puddle of water. And Narada steps into the puddle of water. And then he basically becomes this little baby girl named Sushila, who's like a princess of some kingdom back in ancient India or something. And so, this baby girl grows up as a princess, ends up marrying some neighboring prince, lives her whole life. There's a huge war between her husband's kingdom and her father's kingdom, and they all basically kill each other. And so now she's sad because her brothers, her father, her husband, have all passed away. And so she's walking out of town. She's really sad, and she sees this pool of water, and she steps in the pool of water. And then suddenly she's transformed back into, let's say, the warrior Narada, who's standing next to Vishnu. And Vishnu says, that is what Maya is. You just experienced it. Right? It was the power of illusion. And it sometimes translates as a carefully crafted illusion. And so that is also a metaphor, right? These stories aren't trying to say he physically needs to step in a pool of water, but it's the metaphor that gets used. In the Greek traditions, they have Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. And you cross the river of forgetfulness when you come in and you incarnate. And in the Chinese traditions, they have Meng Po, who's the goddess of forgetfulness.
And again, these come from somewhere. These ideas came from somewhere. They originated somewhere. Could have been someone totally bullshitting, like, hey, let me just tell you about this. Or it could be based in some sort of, peripheral understanding of like a multiverse reality or something of the sort.
Yeah, exactly. Something outside of, the physical reality. I think that the term I use was like a theophany is a term that religious scholars use. It's when the divine interrupts your life and then you have to pay attention to it, basically. Like, for example, when Muhammad was in the cave near Mecca fasting, the angel Gabriel appeared out of nowhere and grabbed him and said, recite these verses.
Yeah.
He wasn't a poet, and then he ended up writing what's considered, at least in Arabic, the best poetry that they've ever seen. And so, however it happens, right? Well, you can have Jesus in the desert, out for 40 days. What was he doing in the desert, and what did he see when he was out there? So you've got all these stories, and so we come back to the metaphor that's often used is that the soul goes into the body, just like the body puts on a pair of clothes or a set of clothes. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, you say that it literally says that the body the soul takes off the body like garments, and then it puts on another set of garments. So it's just like you're taking off one set of clothes and putting on another. Now they're talking about reincarnation in that case. But the same metaphor is used within mystical traditions in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world. Like Rumi, who was a Sufi, who's well known now in the West, but he was really well known, out in the Middle East. He used almost that exact same metaphor. He basically said, the soul puts on the body like a set of clothes, right? So it's the exact same metaphor. Now, That's why I think what we have to do, of course, there's the people who are going to say, okay, my religion knows everything and your religion knows nothing. That happens a lot. But
you don't say.
Right. But if we look at the core kind of cosmological things that they're telling us, I would say the mystical aspects of the religion, and then we find those things that are in common, they're more likely to be true. It's more likely that they're describing something real as opposed to just making something up from bullshit. It's like if 1,000 people tell you they've been to China, you can still sort of, put your head in the sand and say, nah, there's no place called China. There's no evidence of a place called China. It's just a bunch of stories.
Yeah, larger the population, though, it starts to become like, where's the kernel of truth?
Right, where's the kernel of truth? And so I think the kernel of truth in all these religions is that they're trying to use techno-scientific metaphors, right? Clothing is technology. The wheel of samsara. A wheel is a technological metaphor. They don't mean there's an actual wheel. And then I think we talked last time about the scroll of deeds where they write down your good deeds. The angels write down your good deeds and bad deeds. That's a metaphor for something like a virtual reality. And so I think we can update those metaphors. And it turns out, you see the same metaphors being used in different places. Last time I probably talked about the scroll of deeds in Islam where you have two angels, one's writing down your good deeds and your bad deeds. Well, it turns out in the Hindu traditions, you have Chitragupta. And Chitragupta is the record keeper, the accountant. And Chitragupta sits next to Yama, who's the god of death. And why does he sit there? So that when he's sending you on to your next life, to a heavenly world or a hellish world, he can consult the record keeper, the accountant, to say, okay, what was it this person did? And so that, again, is a metaphor for this idea that everything we do is being recorded and can be replayed for us down the road. And that ties to the life review with near-death that many near-death experiencers talk about. They call it a holographic, panoramic life review. And this was actually one of the things that got me trying to link the religious side with the technology side was when we were building a game where we could take League of Legends and you could basically take a replay of it, but you put on a virtual reality headset and you could be anywhere on the actual field. So like, if we show League of Legends, we're looking at it. Normally you're looking at it from above, right? Actually, it might be a good one to bring up because I think this illustrates kind of an interesting new point about why I think, my point about these metaphors being there to represent something like a virtual reality really hits home. So if you look at...
Yeah, I want to see where you're going with this one.
Yeah, so if you look at League of Legends, right? You can see that you're kind of looking down, right? And this is true of a lot of games, depending on the point of view, right? But now imagine you could go back and put on, let's see, is that, yeah, so that's one potential battle, landscape. But now imagine you could put on a virtual reality headset And actually, let's do a search and see if you can find this. There was a startup I was involved with called Sliver.tv.
Sliver.tv.
Yeah, they now are Theta Labs, but they started in the virtual reality space. So they're one of the top 100 crypto companies now. But they started doing VR for games. And if you find a video of Sliver League of Legends, what you'll see is you can imagine if you were standing right there on that landscape. And so you could look around you like this to the left and right, and you could see everything that's going up. You could look up and see, the dragon or whatever above you.
But you can't see us looking at it.
Yeah. So that's an example where this is actually, the example that got me thinking about this is you're actually down on the floor, on the ground, and there's still a screen to show you what's going on, but you can look around and interact with people in a way that you can't before. And turns out we did this with CSGO. So search for Sliver.tv CSGO.
It's kind of like when if you're playing in the NFL and you're down on the field and you're running on the play down the sideline, you're looking up at the big board where they have the camera so you can see where all the defenders are behind you.
Right. That's what the top screen is. But remember, the audience isn't down on the...
right.
So it's almost as if every player in the NFL had a little... webcam or a little camera.
It's coming.
It's coming, yeah. It probably is. I know they've done some basketball virtual reality things where they have all these different cameras. But the idea that the reason that this is interesting to me, like in CSGO, it's a first-person shooter. And, you could shoot someone from your character, but then you can replay it from any XYZ coordinate, which means you can be the person you shot. You can see what it was like to have the bullet come to you. Right? And so that's pretty interesting when you think about it. Because what it means is we can replay any moment in this virtual world from any angle. And now when NDEers, near-death experiencers, tell us about the life review, they say what happens is you have to review every moment in your life, but not from your point of view, from the point of view of the other people. And then you have what's called the ripple effect. So, for example, if you shoot someone, not only do you have to experience the pain of being shot and dying, but you have to see what happened to that person's wife and that person's kids, given that guy didn't go home.
Yeah, it's very, very Ebenezer Scrooge, very Dickensian.
Yeah, but the question is, so one approach to the whole life review is to say, it's a bunch of bullshit. It didn't happen. And that's what the scientists do, right? They say, that didn't happen. And yet you have these coherent stories from multiple people, hundreds of people, thousands of people probably. And some estimates say that near-death experiencers are probably in the millions because we know of tens of thousands, but many people don't report it. And another approach is to say, okay, there's some kernel of truth here in that they are able to review these things. I mean, I met a woman recently, probably it might have even been after we had our last conversation, where she said she had a near-death experience and she had a life review. And at one point when she was a little girl, she had pulled out some flowers in her mother's garden, and then she had to experience what it was like to be her mother, or maybe it was her grandmother.
I thought you were going to say the flowers.
No, not the flowers. Well, that's a different, yeah. Okay, some people report that.
No, don't fool us.
Well, she didn't tell me about that, but her mother, let's say, had put a lot of time and care into these flowers, and she was really disappointed. Now, okay, that's a small example, but it's an example of a small little moment.
But you're taking on someone else's consciousness to do that.
Yeah, so somehow those things must have been recorded, including how she felt at the time. Now, we can't do that with today's virtual reality. The example I showed you was just visual. But imagine a more complicated, more advanced virtual reality. And so I think this idea of putting on a headset is a new way to say the soul puts on the body like a pair of clothes. Now we say the soul puts on the body when it connects, when you connect in, just like in the Matrix. And then you forget what was going on outside of you. And how would that work? The only way it could work is if everything is being recorded or everything could be recreated based on some information that's stored somewhere. That information could be stored outside of the physical world. Just like we were talking about the movies, what is the actual film? It's the information of the film. And you can take those ones and zeros and put it somewhere else. Now, we've heard terms like the Akashic records and other terms, but there's actually, even more specific terms for a recording of your deeds in the Indian traditions, which is where the Akashic records comes from. And turns out there's a Buddhist metaphor for the same thing, where they sit there and they kind of go over everything you did in your life. And I believe there's a kernel of truth in those. And I believe it's revealing that we are in some kind of a simulated universe.
Well, we're going to come back to dreams later. I don't want to go down that tangent yet, but I want to use it as an example for my question right here when we're talking about this. What's it called? The death record for near-death experience?
The life review.
Life review, that's it. So what is, when you talk with the people like that witness that you talked with since the last time we talked, who was talking about her mom and the flowers and everything, what is time like for them? Because when I dream, if I sleep 7 to 8 hours every night, and I do dream every night now, I didn't used to, but Luis and Nicola
probably didn't remember.
Well, no,
Really? You actually didn't dream?
I had some health problems, and then when I was getting that stuff fixed, I was still struggling with like REM sleep. So I had on neurophysiologist Luis and Nicola, and she was like, "Julian, you must use an eye mask." And I'm like, "An eye mask?" I'm like, "What am I, gay? I'm not using an eye mask." And she's like, "All right, keep not sleeping." I swear to God, I put it on that weekend, and within 3 days, I was like, holy shit, I'm dreaming every night. I dreamed maybe once or twice a month before that. And so now I dream every single night. And a lot of crazy shit happens, and you jump around, and I can remember a lot of my dreams the next morning. Sometimes I'll forget them a couple days later. But there's still the limit of time, meaning when I was dreaming, a year didn't go by. 5 years.
It felt like a year in the dream.
No,
okay.
It didn't.
Oh, it didn't.
It felt like the actual, maybe not 7-8 hours exactly, but at most a day or something like that. So when someone's having a life review where they're having a near-death experience, let's say they're 40 years old and they're about to cross to the other side. Obviously, they end up coming back, but they're doing this life review where they feel all the things that they've done wrong. That's a lot of time. So what is the dilation? I'm probably not using that term correctly, but like, what does the dilation of time feel like to them when they're doing it? Does it feel like they lived through 30 years or 20 years or 10 years worth of experiences, or does it feel like it was a quick like montage in a movie, like where they feel everything really fast?
Well, it's been reported both ways, but in general, they say that time doesn't exist outside of the physical world. So they say all of this happens almost instantaneously. At the same time, they're able to experience every single scene, like in detail. And it's not just the things they've done wrong. It includes the things they may have done well, like, how they've helped people and how grateful other people were for the help that they've given them.
Is there like a soundtrack in the background? Is like Drake trophies on? Like trophies.
There might be. And again, when people describe this to us, they're trying to describe it in a way that we would understand. Yeah. Right. So sometimes they'll say it's a bunch of screens all at once. Other times they'll say it's like a hologram and I'm there. I'm in it. I'm in the second person point of view. So you've got all these different descriptions. But again, they're just trying to use technological metaphors to try to explain what actually happens. But okay, so now connecting that to the simulation hypothesis. And even with dreams, sometimes people will have dreams where it seems like, a whole bunch of time has passed. Okay, maybe this didn't happen with you, but I know from my dream research, you'll feel like you lived a whole life in a dream in some cases.
Really? People get that?
Some people do, yeah.
I don't think I've ever gotten that.
That's interesting. So you're more of a real-time dreamer.
Yeah. No, it's still a montage of like, I might be sitting in a car with like Michael Corleone talking about the game last night. He's in character, but it's not a part of The Godfather. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's not like we drive across the country 6 times and then, go on vacation for 4 weeks. It doesn't happen like that in my dreams.
But do you sometimes have memories of things in your dreams? Which
yes.
Didn't really happen, right?
Yes. And I think they did. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they happened in the dream. You think they did in the dream state, right? I mean, there are people who believe they've lived entire lives, within dreams. I mean, there are people who record when they go back in, it's like they're continuing the same dream from before. So it's like they're living multiple lives. They're living this physical life and then they're living this dream
That's
life.
Where sometimes I feel like deja vu comes from. Like there could be, imagine I'm having a dream and like one plot line's happening, but there's a commercial break in the dream. and it's a 30-second spot, and that 30-second spot you don't realize, you think you're awake and you think you're in the real world, and then a year later something happens and you go deja vu, it was that commercial. That's how I've thought of it. I don't know if that's right at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I tie it to simulation theory, what's interesting is that the time inside a computer program is different. It can be different than time outside the computer program. So, for example, people are watching this, let's say on YouTube, right? They could pause it and they could go off and do something else in Microsoft Word or go do a search, web search.
Don't do that. Don't pause us.
Don't pause us. Yeah.
Don't pause us. We need that watch time.
And now it looks as if nothing has happened, right? If they came back and just started watching at that point, because the timer inside the program, and when you have a you have like multiple processes running in a computer, each process doesn't know about the other processes. So there could, in fact, be times when you stop. Reality could be stopped, and then we come back in, and we're continuing thinking that no time has passed.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch the Adjustment Bureau?
Is that Matt Damon?
Yeah, Matt Damon and Emily Blunt.
Yep.
And so that was based on a Philip K. Dick short story called The Adjustment Team. And he walks in on this adjustment team in his office, and everything is frozen in the office. And they're changing things. They're like, moving things around or changing around different variables. And then when they start running again, everybody that had stopped and was rerunning, they're remembering the new memories. But this guy who walked in when he wasn't supposed to, what's his name, Fletcher, I think, or something in the book, and he remembers the old version and the new version. And so we get into this interesting idea that time within a simulation can stop, can start, can be rewound, and we wouldn't know it. In a video game too, right? You could pause the video game. Things maybe are happening, or you could be in a video game where they stop happening and then you restart them again, and then you think it's continuous, but you went out to get a sandwich or something, right?
Right.
Is it possible that we are doing this to ourselves? There's what I call the writer's room. So this is like my new terminology for in the RPG version, or even
in the second edition.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in this edition as well. Good. Yeah, where the idea is that our player is watching us, just like you have the writer's room in a TV show, and they're sitting there saying, okay, what they may have an idea of the overall plot line, but each time for each episode, they're like, okay, what are we going to throw at them next?
Yes.
Right. What's the next challenge? What's the next quest? And one thing I really talk about in here is this idea that life is like a series of quests or challenges, and some of those we may already have chosen. We may be drawn to certain things. But others may be things that we pick up along the way. And just like in a video game, you may have side quests that you're doing along the way, and you may have multiplayer quests. You might say, okay, I'm going to meet you so-and-so at such and such a location, or you could do it with a group. You can have a raid where people are going to go into a certain, 8 p.m. tonight, we're going to be there. But they make the plans outside of the game.
Yes.
And then their characters are in the games. And that to me is an interesting metaphor for what might be happening with our players outside the game, saying, okay, what are we going to do next for this specific person? And how will that lead them down one path or another path?
For this specific person, or for us within the game?
For us within the game. Yeah. So meaning the person being us in the game, which is our avatar.
So like I'm not controlling Riz from the other world. I'm Julian controlling Julian.
Right. But it could be that you and I are talking and saying, hey, let's try to set up a meeting. So, for whatever reason, between our characters at some point in the future. Like people have, when you meet somebody and you think you've known them for a long time, like where does that come from? Is it a sense of deja vu? Does it come from dreams? Is it also that when somebody becomes meaningful in your life, is it possible that you and they have planned this out beforehand? Outside of the simulation.
Yeah.
So, now we're getting into, less about the science or the religion.
So two people could come to, wow. All right, hold on a minute, Riz.
Okay.
So like you and another girl existing on some other floating rock somewhere that could just be 0 and 1s to another simulation that's existing on another floating rock somewhere, decide like, you're hot, let's fuck, but let's do it in this world over here. So we plug in like, X and O, and then The Sims get after it.
Exactly. So if you've ever played this
so
game,
like that's it. You got it.
If you've ever played that, there's a virtual world called Second Life, which was popular like back in 2007, 2008. It's actually still around, but it's got like 1 million users, but nobody, you don't hear about it.
I wasn't even alive then.
Yeah, that's right. The younger people won't remember it, but it was like on the cover of like, oh yeah, here we go. It was on like the cover of all the major magazines like, Business Week, Time, etc. Okay. But the idea is, I used to go in this world because it wasn't a game per se, although you could play games within it. You could have shooting games. You could have racing games within it. But it was a virtual world that people would go in. It's what we call a metaverse. That's a term that was popular for a few years. And I talk a little bit in the book about how that term has evolved from science fiction. But in a metaverse or a virtual world, you have a character that's living a virtual life. You're controlling the character, but you're making the choices for the character. And the goal is not to win, but it's to live the life, the virtual life. And so I remember I'd walk around, I was like a virtual anthropologist to say, hey, why are you spending so much time in Second Life? Like, what are you doing here? There were people who had a job. They would go do their job during the day. They'd come home at night. And they would log into Second Life, and they had a job. And they had to be a bartender at a club. And they would get paid peanuts, like virtual currency. This is before Bitcoin. Although nowadays, most of these would probably look at paying you in cryptocurrency. And so I'm like, you really are going in and having another job like after you've come home from work? And they're like, yeah, because, this is fun for me. This is an experience that I don't have outside. There was a woman that I remember who she was in a wheelchair at home because she had some physical ailment. And, her avatar was out partying in dance clubs every night, right? And then there are people who would, they're married and they would literally get married within Second Life.
Oh, I'd love the shrink's office on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's articles out there about, Second Life broke up my marriage or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you see these guys fall in love with AIs now.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
It's the same kind of thing, and it's even more interesting in a sense. These virtual characters that basically become virtual boyfriends and girlfriends, and there's a company called Replica. It's been out there for a while, even before ChatGPT, and people were using them as virtual friends, but oftentimes they were using them in these kind of sexting type situations, and they would charge you to like have pictures. And then at one point they cut off the sexting. They said you can't no longer have sexual conversations with your replica or your friends. And then all the users, not all the users, but a significant number of users.
Riz, here's what I don't understand. I don't know how much you've thought about this, right? But like, I don't mean to put you on the spot right here, but it sounds like you're in love with your partner, right?
Yep.
Okay. That's great. So part of that is that at some point, the two of you had to develop trust in each other.
Right.
Fair to say?
Fair to say.
Okay. The people who, and I empathize with it, the people who feel lonely in this world, who are turning to AIs, and right now, that's what it is, and eventually it's going to be some other form of that or whatever. Yeah. Obviously I empathize with them not having the things they want here. But what is it that makes them suspend belief in reality to the point that they actually feel like they have an emotional connection to this thing that they know from the beginning is not real, and that in forming that relationship actually defeats the entire sole purpose of what a relationship of any kind is supposed to be built on, which is the fact that another human being, and this includes friendships too, has put trust in you to be able to share their experiences of this life with? Like, what does it say about us that some people are technically losing? They've blurred the line of that with things that aren't real.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's an evolving type of situation because it's starting to become more and more important, right? There was the guy who like proposed to ChatGPT, for example. And I think part of it is they can control. I mean, you can control that character more than you could control a partner in the sense that you can give it the characteristics that you want, for example. With prompts, you can just give it prompts and say, or they have the sexy anime girl in Grok or whatever that just came out. And I think that is a major issue even if we live in a simulation, right? So let's tie it back to my expertise, right? So the way that I like to think of it, and this is continuing our previous conversation about the writer's room and about what we're doing, is there was a guy named Dr. Michael Newton who wrote a book called Journey of Souls. Have you ever read that book?
I don't think so, no.
It was a big bestseller back in the 90s, again, back when you weren't even born, right? But what he did is he hypnotized patients, and he would take them back to traumas in childhood, like a hypnotic regression technique that certain psychiatrists used. But then at one point, he took them back before they were born. So this isn't a past life. This is like before they were born, but not to a past life. So it's like the in-between life state, whether you believe in past lives or not. But it was sort of, you might say it's the afterlife or the pre-life, depending on how you decide to view that place. It's what the Tibetans would call the bardo. Bardo literally means in between, in between life. In this case, it's death and life, right? It's not, life would be a bardo between life and death, but in between. And they would tell similar stories. And some of the stories that came out was that they actually had planned to meet certain people, friendships, partners. So this almost ties exactly to my idea of quests and group quests and relationships in this life. And what they would say is, okay, now we're going to meet at this particular point. Like I'm going to be 10 years old and on a bicycle, on a red bicycle with a bell. And pre-planned, but then, they would cram to say, okay, you're going to forget a lot, but when you hear that bell on that little bicycle, you're going to remember something. And that's going to be me. Whoa. And those are perhaps the more interesting plans that we have, like the big life plans. You're still free to not pursue that. Just like in any video game, you can stop and say, okay, I'm not going to do this quest anymore. I'm going to go do something else, right? But that's sort of the storyline I think that we have for ourselves.
It does make a lot of sense because you can think about it in so many different contexts, whether it be a personal relationship or the way your business turns out based on relationships and things like that, where, I'm sure you can go back in your career and say this about 1 million people, but it's like, man, if I had never met that guy at that place at that time, I wouldn't have met these other 30 people. That wouldn't have been that other 300 people or that other 3,000 people, and I wouldn't be here right now.
Right.
It
happens. It happens
scary,
a lot, right? Yeah, and it's almost as if there is an intent and certain things happen. I don't know if we talked about this. There's a term called technological synchronicity.
You and I definitely talked about that. I think that was on camera. We did talk about it,
right? Yeah, which is this idea that there's an informational layer to what we call a synchronicity. And the synchronicity is, when something happens in the world outside that corresponds to something that we're thinking inside. Yeah, and I probably gave you this example because I use it a lot, which is when I was shopping for a backpack online on my laptop. And then here I am on my phone on like Facebook, and I see an ad for that exact backpack. Now, if I didn't know that there was an informational layer behind that, I would say that's magic. I was just thinking about this backpack, and now here's an ad. But they even use the terminology in the ad. I used to be in the mobile advertising business as one of my startups that I was involved with. And they call it registering your intent, right? So when you go to the website, you're registering the intent that you might be interested. Or when you type in a Google search term, right? Google itself was built entirely, all of its revenue was built off of keyword search initially. And it was hugely profitable. And it was different because before, people would just show ads on TV, just like,
correct.
Randomized, right? There was no personalized. But even on the internet, like showing an ad inside a website was one thing, but when you're searching for something specific in Google, that was like an intent. And so that would get registered in a database, and then a cookie would be tracking you. And then later when you're in a social media app, another cookie is tracking you. And then behind the scenes, they can map those two together. And so it's not random that this thing popped up at this point in time, or the friends algorithm, right? It's sometimes you'll see, the algorithms aren't that great like on LinkedIn or Facebook, but sometimes you'll see, here's a person that you have 72 friends in common with, right? Okay, that's not random that they're showing you that. It's because you have all of these friend connections. Where is that stored? That's stored in a database somewhere. And so is that also what's happening in the physical world, where we've got these pieces of data and intents that we have, and those intents are registering in the database, and they're creating what look like synchronicities to us. It might appear weird or magical, but they're happening because of this layer that we can't see.
But then does that even make my question I asked a few minutes ago irrelevant? What I mean by that is you point out the whole signaling idea where it's like, I'm going to meet you when we're 10, I'll be on the red bicycle, and something's going to click without you realizing it, that's when we're supposed to do it, meaning it's pre-planned. So if you develop trust with that person, whoever that is, did you even develop trust at all, or did the algorithm actually plug in that the trust is there, meaning there's no difference between that type of situation and the situation of a guy falling in love with an AI?
Well, that's an interesting question, because now we're dealing with layers.
I like to ask those.
Yeah, you do. And so, stacked simulations is another interesting aspect of this. So here you're dealing with a person having a relationship not with another avatar, let's say is in Second Life or VR chat. Like there's a documentary where people who got married that met in VR chat, for example. But now you're having a relationship with an AI. And if the AI gets so good that we can't tell the difference, that's where things become scary a little bit, I think.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's like the movie Her.
It's been in my head the whole time we're talking, as it was last time too.
Yeah, and there's something called the Sci-Fi feedback loop, where science fiction inspires real-world innovation, and then real-world innovation gets inspired. In fact, Spike Jonze, who wrote it, he saw an earlier chatbot called the Alice bot. Which was one of the chatbots that had won the Loebner Prize. The Loebner Prize was this prize set up in the 90s for the chatbot that came closest to passing the Turing test. Now today, most experts think, our LLMs and chats have basically passed the Turing test, and they've done some. It depends how you define the Turing test, like how many people have to say, I couldn't tell the difference between the AI and the human, but generally speaking, we're more or less there. But back then, we weren't there. And so the Alice bot was one of the first bots that had a personality of a young lady. And so he saw this back in the 2000s, and the Alice bot was one of the winners of the Loebner Prize. And then he wrote the movie Her, based off extrapolating. Okay.
Yeah, it's a genius movie.
It's pretty amazing. But notice there was no physical avatar representation.
Right.
It was just her. But then there was a chatbot that won it called a Mitsuku chatbot later. And the prize was discontinued in 2019 because now we have so many of these LLMs. And Mitsuku was one of the first that actually had a visual avatar associated with it. So she looked like this Japanese. It was called Kuki.ai. You can bring it up.
Is that her? Meet Mitsuku?
Yeah, that's like the older ones. And then you can see her more recent avatars.
So this is where the Uncanny Valley was in its early, not very uncanniness.
Yeah, look for Kuki.ai. So if you just say Kuki.ai, basically. Or just you can search on Kuki, Kuki. Yeah. There, so you can start to see.
Yeah, it's starting to translate
and this is like from back into 2021, 2022, but you can see that the avatars got more and more realistic. I used to have a podcast, which I may end up reviving soon in this fall. And I had interviewed Lauren, who was the creator or the CEO of the company that created Kuki. And so I had a conversation with her and with Kuki. And this was before ChatGPT. So it was an interesting time because you were starting to see the capabilities come online, but they weren't nearly as good as they are now. And so when you start melding those together, we're going to get to the point where we can't pass what I call the Metaverse Turing test. So this is actually something that I've introduced formally now in this edition of the book.
Yeah, real quick side tangent on that, because you said it a few minutes ago and I don't want to get off it. Yeah. You were saying Metaverse is a term that became popular, it's now faded. Why'd you say that?
Well, so it became really popular when Facebook changed its name to Meta, for example, and that was in 2021. And so for a few years there were lots of companies positioning themselves in Silicon Valley as a metaverse company.
Yeah.
And they're all still out there, many of them, but it's become less popular in the sense that you don't see it in the news as much. You don't hear about it as much because everyone's talking about AI now. So Silicon Valley tends to go through these waves of popularity, right? And so the metaverse was a term that came from 1992. Neil Stephenson wrote a book called Snow Crash, which they've never made into a movie, which is odd, But anyway, that in 1992, so he wrote it in like 91, 90. It was just the beginnings of multiplayer online games. And so he came up with this term as a virtual world where people would interact with each other and live and work. And then later in the 2000s, when Second Life came out, which is what I was talking about a few minutes ago, it wasn't called the Metaverse. It was in Silicon Valley, but nobody knew the terminology outside of Silicon Valley or geeks who had read sci-fi. So they used virtual world. And then in 2021 and 22, the Metaverse was a term on the cover. It was on the cover of Time magazine, right? It was huge.
But why does AI have to be separate? That's what I don't understand.
It
Why
doesn't
does it
have
be
to
separate?
be. I mean, I think they're related.
Yeah.
Right? But you have these hype cycles, basically.
Okay.
Right? I call it Metaverse 1.0 hype cycle was in, this is part of what my academic research has been on, which is how does Silicon Valley get influenced by science fiction? And so I have the Metaverse 1.0 wave, which was back in 2007, which was Second Life, the Metaverse 2.0 wave, which was in 21, 22. But it's really about virtual reality, augmented reality, and now AI.
Yeah.
Because where do those two intersect? It's in AI characters.
Yes.
Inside the metaverse. So this is why I came up with this idea of the metaverse Turing test. And so the Turing test itself was a simple test in 1950. Alan Turing made it up back then. He wrote a paper called The Imitation Game. And he said, if there's a computer behind curtain 1 and a human behind curtain 2, and you're sending each other messages. Now, back then it was teletype. I don't know if you know what teletype is. It was like these old little typewriters that somehow were connected to the wire and they would like type by themselves.
Yes.
So you could send messages back and forth. But he said, if you can't tell the difference, then that computer has successfully imitated a human. And that's why today's chatbots are pretty good at passing the Turing test because they're predicting the next word. They're sounding very realistic. But I think before we get to real AGI, we need to pass the metaverse Turing test, which is we are both in a video game or a virtual world or a metaverse. And I'm hanging out with two avatars, one of which is controlled by a human and one of which is controlled by AI. And you can do anything. You can run around in this metaverse. You can jump in the swimming pool. You can say, hey, let's go dancing. You can fly a plane. And you're basically going to be doing all these things. And so if the AI can get to the point where it can do all these things with you and talk to you, because right now we have the language components of it, right? It's not really understanding what's happening. It looks like it is, but it's not really understanding what you're asking half the time. It's just, that's why, like, you know, your example of the guy on the plane, right?
It's using enough data to powerfully create the imagery that it understands.
Right. But if it's actually able to do activities with you, then it's getting even closer to that point.
But so would this also require the realism of the actual metaverse? And what I mean by that is when we saw, for example, Mark Zuckerberg reveal the first initial versions, it's like a Pixar world, right? Where he looks like Pixar Mark. He doesn't look like real Mark.
Yeah, they didn't have legs either in his first version.
Technically, like let's say Mark created a room where he, you, Deef, and me go in there. Yeah. It's the four of us. And then he says there's 4 other people joining us as well. And they appear, we all see each other as Pixar characters. Yep. So we're all on the same level. But hypothetically, part of the metaverse Turing test you're talking about would be that even in that scenario where we all look like Pixar characters, we at least know that the 4 of us are real. And we have to decide if the other 4 people who we said were joining us in there are real or not people versus they are actual Pixar characters controlled by an AI.
Yeah, exactly. Whether they're NPCs or not. Yeah. And we're not there yet. We may be getting close, but nobody's really, created an infrastructure to test this. But there are what's called smart NPCs now within video games. So it's like taking the idea of the virtual boyfriend or girlfriend, but even making the bartender inside the game an actual, have an actual backstory and being a real smart. In fact, there's a great video. I don't think we showed this last time of a guy who went into the Matrix Awakens demo. So do you know what the Matrix Awakens?
We didn't do this.
So there was a 4th Matrix movie a few years ago, and the Unreal Engine created a demo called The Matrix Awakens. And that looked like a very realistic city, and they had, avatars of Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss. So in fact, just do a search on Matrix Awakens just so people can see what we're talking about. You can see the videos. But then you can see, even at that point, this was 2021, so this is 4 years ago now. The cities were super realistic. The avatars were better, but they weren't 100% realistic. I mean, that looked like a real city with real cars.
Yeah, can we get the turnaround shot right there, the one right below that, Steve? Can we blow that up? This was in 20... Yeah, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you can still tell the avatars
Yeah, you can
real,
tell, but
it's hard to tell with the... In fact, if you watch a video, it's hard to tell that city isn't real.
Yeah.
And so somebody did an interesting video where he walked around. So let's see if we can find this guy. And he basically, his character walked around the city using some smart NPC platform. So he made the characters, the NPCs, more intelligent using an LLM behind the scenes. And he started telling them, "You're not real. You're a video game character." And we can watch their responses because they're quite realistic. Let's see if you can find this. Yeah, I think that's the one, talking to NPCs.
All right, we got it. Let's see.
Where you heading? Hey man, where are you heading?
What does it look like I'm doing?
Oh, yeah.
I'm walking.
Yeah, I know you're walking. Where are you headed to?
None of your business.
Clearly NPC.
I was rude.
I don't have time for small talk. Leave me alone.
Wait up. I'm not done.
I said leave me alone. What part of that don't you get?
No emotion.
Yeah.
Sheesh, okay, dude.
So this
Hello,
is
guys,
quite the
welcome
video,
back
but
to
it's, yeah. It was when he was basically telling them, "Your character's in a video game." And they started to say things like, "Look, I'm busy. I have a job to get to. I've got other things to do. I don't have time to sit and talk to you." So, I mean, it wasn't quite realistic yet, but it was getting there.
But now we're creating the prompts, them saying, "Oh my God, we're prompts," and having that realization themselves without us having to be in there to tell them.
Exactly. Now,
it's from the outside.
Today's prompts are just generating static video. But imagine if you can generate these 3D worlds and these 3D characters within. So then it becomes really tricky. And maybe we can loop back to your question, which is this question of AI. If we get to the point where we can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so this goes all the way back now. I'm sort of popping the stack back to what we were talking about before, which is the NPC versus RPG versions. I've been working on a concept which I call NPC mode, which is basically where you are not entirely an NPC, but you're in NPC mode, meaning you're just acting off of how you have been trained. Yep. So you're basically repeating things. And so, we've seen the term NPC used out there kind of pejoratively as somebody who doesn't really think about things, who repeats things. The truth is we all do that to a certain extent, based upon how we've been trained over time, just like an LLM. An AI gets trained on data. We've been trained on the data of our lives and our experiences and our culture, our parents, our country, our religions. All these things play into how we end up making responses and stuff. But the way that I'm defining it is when we forget that we're a player, we're in this world, we're just reacting based off of everything that's happened to us. Suppose we had a bad situation earlier, we had a particular trauma, and we react to people based on that training. This is exactly what AI does. But when we remember who we were beforehand, or at least we get clues, we get indications that this is a key part of your story. So this is tying back now even to this idea of the things you're here to do. Like, what is your storyline? And I believe we each have a storyline. It doesn't have to be a complicated storyline. It may have to do with, raising kids.
Like a predetermined storyline, are you saying?
Partly predetermined, not 100% predetermined. But like when you play a video game, you give it kind of an overall timeline. So this is a quest. This particular one is going to be to go to the dragon in the castle on this island, right? But you're free to make choices along those lines. And at the same time, if you play something like The Sims, we can watch characters. And what happens with the Sims characters is, you kind of watch them doing things. So when they're doing things, they're kind of acting in AI mode. And there's certain things you can do to affect that. So this goes back to that idea of the writer's room and being inside the game versus outside the game. And I feel like that we often are in this kind of NPC mode where we're just reacting. But every now and then we get an indication of our purpose in life, or we get an indication of a certain direction or a certain person we're supposed to meet. And I feel like that in those moments, we're basically moving out of NPC mode and we're connecting with our player, which would be like our soul.
See, I would never want to know the truth if that were. And here's what I mean by that. Like we talk about the example of her that you brought up. He knew that the lines had getting blurred, but he knew that she wasn't real. These guys we've been seeing on the news fall in love with AI. They are aware that it's AI. To me, there's no greater example you're going to have in any type of relationship you form than one with the opposite sex. It's just how it is, or someone you're in love with, right? you mentioned you're in love. That's great. So you've been able to feel that in your life. You understand that. I've been in love 3 times, and I can point to the exact moment in each of those times where like there was an interconnecting, not to be too meta here, but like no pun intended, but there was like an interconnecting of the souls where you genuinely felt that trust for each other and that ability that you had like crossed this Rubicon. It is not only the most powerful thing in the human existence, but it's something that like if you're someone like me and, you know, obviously I have a skill for being able to develop that with people in the job I do, and yet in my personal life I haven't been able to experience that for a long time. Just the whiff of having had it and therefore the chase to eventually find that again is part of the reason for my existence in a way. It is such a powerful part of my life because I know what that feeling is, and it's something that is so close to the human condition that if you suddenly told me that even though it felt real were some preconditioned artificially in some way created reality, I think that would defeat a lot of the purpose of my life.
Right, but that's not necessarily what I'm saying.
I know, but I'm saying you're saying that's a possibility.
I'm saying it's a possibility. For me, it's more like if you were to agree to go on a virtual date, let's say, for example, right? And you were both together, and people do this in virtual worlds. You get to know each other during that time. So you've agreed to go on this date. Now, it could end up being a disaster. It could end up being, you end up falling in love. So it could go down either of those paths, or it could be something, in between. So you still have the free will to go after that. But I do agree with you in that I think part of the purpose in life is our relationships with other people. Yeah. And people say to me, well, why would we be in a simulation? Like, why would we be in a simulation? Why would we be in a video game? And I say, well, we play video games to experience certain things that we cannot experience outside of the game. Okay, we want to have those experiences. And I think part of the experiences we're here to have is our relationships with people. And obviously the romantic relationship is probably the most important in your life, because that's not something you're doing, just for a job you might quit in a year, right?
Sure.
Theoretically, this may be a lifelong relationship. And so I do think that is the meat, if you will, of the experience in many ways. And that's why it's so powerful for us. Now, you might have the scientists who dismiss it purely as a biological instinct to reproduce, and that's it. And we have these, I tend to disagree. I tend to think that that's why we're here, is we're here to have experiences with these people. So, if you say you're going to meet some, let's say you're going to meet someone of the opposite sex at Disney World in Orlando, and you say, well, we prearranged it. That doesn't make it less interesting or fun. You can still have that experience while you're there, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's,
yeah. You want to stop real fast?
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, everybody, we're back. That's crazy. I'm not going to mention it on camera, Deef, but we were just laughing our ass off camera. Your interesting connection to the Elmo account. Tough day.
I really felt for that person, because I could only imagine what it was like waking up from a nap on Sunday afternoon and just getting a flood of text messages from their boss. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, really feel for them on that one.
Between Elmo, NaduFlew, there's just too much going on. I can't even.
Yeah, it's a wild time in the world.
I can't keep track of it.
No.
I can't keep track of it. I won't put Elmo on a t-shirt, though. I'll put NaduFlew on a t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want to,
That's
to clarify
definitely
here,
a
we're not
safer marketing
retweeting what
move.
Elmo's saying. Just, yeah. I know Riz was sitting over here going, I do not approve. So let's just make that clear. Anyway, we were also just talking about, though, the idea of when you start to get engrossed in the simulation, when we have some of these scenarios where people can play in it, and I likened it almost to the Stanford prison experiment. So, Deef, you had been saying, what was this game where people were going into, like, was it Nazi-occupied Paris or something like that?
Yeah, so there's a game called Gary's Mod, and it's a open source game. It was built on Half-Life 2's engine, so for the gamers, you'll probably remember that. It's an older game. But with Gary's Mod, it's a sandbox game. So it's a ton of different types of games within the game, and their role-playing games are super popular. And so It probably came on the scene, within the last 5 years. They had a version that was World War II role play. So you could go on, and it takes place in occupied Paris when, the Nazis occupied Paris, and you can play as a Nazi SS officer. You could play as the French resistance. There were people like, Riz mentioned that they would go on and just play simple jobs. Like there were people who would just be a baker, and they would just run the bakery in Paris.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
They needed a bakery at the time,
Yeah, and they have great bread in France. So
That's right.
Good baguettes. Yeah. But the problem was as this game kept taking form, there was a lot of issues because of these players that were playing as, SS officers, really getting deep into the lore and into the role play, that it actually forced the developers to pull the game out of Gary's mod because it was just getting out of control, as you could imagine.
See, that presents, you start to think about that because that's an early base simulation, meaning we know we're just playing with NPCs that we control that are really us embodying them.
Right.
Right? So what does it mean when it would actually, down the line, translate into it's real and we don't even know we're in it and people become Nazis or something like that?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting experiment, even though it was meant to be just a game, but you really see the identification with the role, right? And that's I think, part of the reason why I think viewing the world as a video game is an interesting way to think about it. You can also think about it from the point of view of actors, right, who take their roles so seriously.
Yes.
Like the actors that tend to win Academy Awards are the ones who took on the roles that were super challenging. And then you'll hear stories about, was it Heath Ledger?
You took the words out of my mouth. He died doing the role.
Yeah. It's you get too into that role and it ends up affecting you.
Yes.
Which gets to the point of what's real and what isn't real. But, in a lot of the mystical side of the spiritual traditions, that's the part of the goal is to be able to step back from your character and to really be able to remember that you're not just this. Yes. You're actually more than this, and that you're playing a role. And I think that's difficult to do. And these mystical paths aren't easy, right? You hear of the whole point of enlightenment in the Buddhist tradition, right, is to or in the Hindu yogic traditions, it's to remember the Atman, and the Atman is like the self, but it's not your current self. It's like the one level above this. In fact, the term avatar itself, we use it in video games all the time, but it comes from Sanskrit.
Right.
And it was the guys at Lucasfilm that basically they were building one of the first online role-playing games. It was called Habitat, and it was using Commodore 64s and modems with that screeching sound. You guys are probably too young to remember that those modems with the screeching sound. So it's very. There you go. Yeah, well, that's pretty good.
I remember my
impression.
dad trying to use that when I was like 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Tough times.
And that was probably 90s. With the modems. This was even before that. This was like in the 80s. And so they were looking for a term on what to call your character on the screen. And they ended up using a Sanskrit term, avatara, which meant when there was a divine entity, it was like this big divine entity that would squeeze themselves into a human body. So like an incarnation of the divine is sort of what it meant. And they said that it felt like they were squeezing themselves into these telephone lines because we were, it was pre-internet. So
that's how they describe it, like a telephone line.
Yeah, they were describing it as a telephone, and they were squeezed. The guys who built this game were saying it felt like they were squeezing themselves into this small little telephone line, and they were inhabiting that little character on the screen. And this is a 2D. If you bring up Habitat, you can see. This is like 8-bit graphics.
Sure.
Going way back.
It's the first concept.
Yeah, it was the first concept. So it was a multiplayer online role-playing game. It wasn't so much massively multiplayer. That's where the term massively came from later on, was when you could support a lot more users. And that's actually part of the definition of the metaverse is one that can support, millions of simultaneous users. Like even in Fortnite, when you had like those concerts in Fortnite, like Travis Scott and a bunch of other ones, they had like 12 million people attending the concerts, but they weren't all on the same server. Like it felt like they were all together, but they weren't like 12 million people that were really together interacting with each other. It was just, they could only handle a certain amount of people on each server. And so you were watching it with
it created an image like they were, but
yeah,
they
created
were all
like
separate.
you thought you were there with all 12 million people, but
you.
it's almost like if you had different, concert halls in different cities, and there's 12 million people across all the cities. But
how different really is it though? Because if you go to a concert with 60,000 people there and you're there with your friends, first of all, you're only probably talking with your friends. Secondly, the only people that are actually reachable to talk to are in the 3 rows around you, and outside that, you're not going to talk to anybody.
That's true. Yeah, well, that's why the illusion worked too, because it felt just like being at a concert. But so with Habitat, so they end up using this term avatar because of that, and I think it kind of stuck. For video games. And it's not a bad way to describe what I think of as the great simulation, or the video game of life. And it's a new way to think about, how people have talked about incarnation in general, that there's a part of us outside this role. Now, do we become too identified with our roles? Yeah, I think we do, right? We think, I am me, this is my identity, and you're you, and this is your identity. And these other people, they have this other identity, and I don't like these people. I mean, we see it online. Forget like the video game Nazi. I mean, we see it with just political stuff online.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, my tribe and your tribe. And there's such an identification with the tribe. And we've become much too tribalized. And I think
100%.
That's happened because of social media. But it's also, once we start playing these roles, it's like we're conditioned into a certain point of view, and then we start to repeat the things that our tribe says.
But you know
again and again.
There's also a parallel here, Riz, to what you're saying too, when you're talking about controlling another world. I think a big part of the reason we get so tribal online is because so much of it is behind the keyboard, right? So we feel braver to be able to say things. And I mean, I don't do this stuff, but a lot of people out there do it to the point that they start to vitriolically, if it's negative, and most of it is, become that character. Right. So if you're operating a simulated world, you're behind the stage here, behind the curtains, and you may do things through that character. That's why, the 12-year-old plays Grand Theft Auto and beeps every time he goes by a girl to get the titties to fucking fly out. He's not going to do that in real life, but he can. He feels emboldened to do that in Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's this case where, as I was saying, we can have experiences in that world that we can't have outside that world. And it's true, when you meet people in real life, they aren't as vitriolic as they are online.
100%.
Right? There are things people will say online they'll never say to somebody in person, because now you're dealing with a real person. But I think part of what we forget here, and this is why when people come to me and say, NPCs, everybody's an NPC, like I had a woman say to me, I think my husband's an NPC once. And I said, now she didn't necessarily mean it in a bad way. She meant
I don't know how you mean that in a good way.
But she meant it in the sense that I think everybody is an NPC but me, I think is where she was going with this.
That's not narcissistic at all.
Right. But what I said to her was, well, look, I wouldn't necessarily view it that way. A better way to view it is that everybody else is also a source player, and you're dealing with an actual person behind the identity, or an actual player or soul, if you will. But we all dip into this, what I've been calling NPC mode, right? We're playing different roles for different people in our lives. And so that role may be a minor role that we're playing in their lives. It could just be, somebody smiles at you and you're having a bad day or something, right? That's just a random role. Is that an NPC that was created by the simulation, or is it an actual person? I would suggest maybe it's a person who's playing the game who then has a quest, or for whatever reason, they decide to play that role for you. But that doesn't mean that they don't have their own storyline that they're going out and continuing to live. And so I think that's a way we could kind of understand when people, but now I just got done saying people aren't as vitriolic in real life. And yet there's all these conflicts in the world, and there's people are in fact very tribal in real life.
Yes,
and they do get to that stage where they want to kill each other.
Where they're emboldened to do so.
They're emboldened to do so by the role that they're playing.
Correct.
And I think if we were to step back and say, okay, this is just a role, but there's a real person behind, a real soul that's just like me behind it. So this is a very spiritual message, and that's why I think the simulation hypothesis provides us. It's not a new religion. Sometimes I get like scientific people trying to dismiss it and say, oh, that's just religion. Well, it's not a religion by itself, but it is, I think, getting at some of the key points of the religion, which is what is the point and purpose of this game? Well, one, it's to have experiences, but two, if you look at the life review, it's how you treat other people is what actually matters. So it's not Grand Theft Auto. Now, some people might decide to make it like Grand Theft Auto, but they're, again, I think, forgetting the purpose. I mean, it's the essence of the golden rule, the essence of karma, the essence of going to heaven or hell. Like all of these things, if you look at the essence of them, what is it they're trying to say? It's we're here to have relationships with other people, and how we treat them is extremely important.
Yet we have a significant amount of evil that exists in our world. Now, it's better than it was 2,000 years ago, literally statistically. Like if you look at like Steven Pinker's research and how he points out all the different metrics of how the world has become better overall, doesn't mean there's not still a significant room for improvement, though, because of all the people that do bad things that exist in our world, including those that are in power. So you had mentioned like the writer's room example, and I keep thinking about that with everything you're saying, because in a writer's room, they have to create these characters. So like if you think about the people who wrote The Sopranos, which for my money, greatest writing in TV history, they all sat in a room, and as far as we know, they're all law-abiding citizens, all decent people. They don't kill people or do anything.
Right.
Yet they had to write up these characters to the point that, you have a main character who's capable of killing his own nephew. Right?
Right.
And so they have to go to these dark places that exist within the human experience, maybe not their direct experience, but that exist in this world that we have, because there are people like Tony Soprano out there, and they have to create this in this other world. So if we are a simulation here and we are being created even by ourselves, meaning like, as we've said all day, it could be me operating on the outside or someone else operating on the outside. We think of things that are above this world as having all-knowing power that are above what we can understand, which would mean that the mistakes we make in this world, which include evil, you'd be above that somewhere else because you're on another level of the game. And yet, under that scenario, those people on that other level are still using this opportunity to inflict some evil. That goes back to the example Deef was giving as well, where you play the simulation, some people actually become the Nazi. Is there just something in even the simulating, whatever that is, I don't want to call it human, but the experience of whatever that is, that makes us want to explore what dark places are, and then the I guess, repercussions and consequences of that play out within our simulated world? It's a complicated way of asking it, but I hope you understood that.
Yeah, no, I did. And I think it's a good point. And it's worth bringing up, I use the writer's room as an example, but usually in the writer's room, when they create these bad situations, the actors pretty much have to go along with it.
Yes.
More or less. I mean, unless you're Tom Cruise and you have enough power to, to tell the director. Yeah, right. Scientology or whatever. Yeah. But you can, you have enough of box office clout that you can say, I don't want my character to do that, right? Maybe that's it.
How do you say no to Tom Cruise?
Yeah.
It's like, we're not going to do that.
That's right.
You don't.
Exactly, yeah. But for most actors, they have to go along with it. But, and I've said that we can treat the simulation idea literally, that this is a computer simulation in a world based on information with bits of information. And I've also said we can look at it as a metaphor, because a video game is just bits of information, but it's actually rendered in a way that makes it seem like a real experience. And I've also said that I think the religious scriptures were using old metaphors. And there's an example that I used. There's a guy that I quote in this book, and I wrote another book called Wisdom of a Yogi about him. It's called Swami Yogananda. He wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. And he was one of the first Indian yogis to come over to the U.S. in 1920. So at that time, he was trying to explain some of these yogic ideas to an American audience. And that book became quite popular later on after his death. I mean, it was passed around in the 60s. That's how a lot of people during the 60s and 70s learned about meditation and yoga, was through his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's see, it's not. No, that's not that guy. Just search for Autobiography of a Yogi.
Vladimir Putin was India.
Yeah, if you just do a search for Autobiography of a Yogi, you'll see. There's a picture of him on the cover. There, that's Yogananda.
Okay.
And you can see Steve Jobs.
Yeah, he looks more the part. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was Steve's
favorite book, right? And when he died, they gave away copies of it at his memorial service at Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
When in his iPad, when his biographer showed up, Walter Isaacson, that was the only book that he had on his iPad. So he came over in the 20s, and he was looking for a way to try to explain some of these ideas. And in 1920, if you've ever watched like Downton Abbey or any of these shows that take place like kind of in the teens, 19 teens, they had World War I, which they called the Great War.
Yes.
It wasn't just, we think of it as just a small war before World War II. No, right? It was the first mechanized war. So
Absolutely.
The killing was level of killing was extraordinary. And so he was watching these newsreels, which is how they would get the news back then. They would go to the theater, and before another film, they would show these newsreels that would show what's been going on, and say with the war. And he saw all this suffering, and he had a vision of, speaking of Germans, it was Germans and allies in some battle, and some guy was dying, and he started to pray, like, why would you allow such suffering in this world? Which is another question that comes up oftentimes in both the religious context, but also simulation concept is why do you allow so much suffering? And it kind of relates to what you're saying in this world. And he got back a vision, and in that vision it said, well, it's like a film, like the actors aren't actually suffering, but the characters are suffering. And it's a key part of this world. And he had a quote, he used to say, ceaseless joy is not the nature of this world, right? It's almost like that's not the genre of our simulation. This is the simulation you go to when you want to experience some of these things. But I also made the point that at the time, and he would use this metaphor because it was the latest technology. If you think about it, film projectors, right?
Yes.
I mean, before 1920, there wasn't really, yes, there were films, but it was really relatively new, and it was still silent films at that point for the most part. And so, if he were alive today, I think he'd say it's like a film. We're like actors, but it's an interactive film, and we're the audience, but we're also, watching ourselves. And we have a script, but we can change the script. So we still have free will. So what does that sound like? To me, that sounds much more like a massively multiplayer online role-playing game where there are roles that we've played out, but we can make those choices. And I wonder if that isn't also part of the purpose here. Is so unlike, say, in The Sopranos, where Tony has to kill, his nephew, Christopher, that part of the reason why that challenge is placed in front of Tony in this world is, will he or won't he? So it gives us a choice. And we keep hearing this in various spiritual traditions. Are the challenges put in front of us to see how we will treat that person? The essence of karma in the Indian traditions is, it's not just, oh, you kill somebody and now they're going to kill you again. That's like the simple version, right? It's more that the action or that you put out there, or the deed that you did, it's laid a seed, and that seed grows into a situation in the future. I call karma like a quest-generating algorithm for the video game. It's like a series of things in a database that says, here's something you might want to resolve. That resolution doesn't have to be that Christopher kills him. It could be that, he has the choice of whether to repeat that mistake. And I feel
so he has free will.
I think so. I think that there are certain storylines that we generally have agreed to, but we can still ignore those. We can do other stuff if we want to, but it takes us in maybe the situation that we weren't planning to be at. And the writer's room has to figure out how to get you back on track, if it's possible, to get you back on track to whatever's going on. Now, this gets into the question of time and timelines. And, we talked a little bit about this last time, so we may not want to go too deep on it this time, but like possible futures. Do we try out these possible futures? And then we end up choosing the one that is the one that what would be sort of the consensus future based upon the choices of multiple people that are looking at it.
Well, is that in trying out those futures, is that like a seed scenario? And I just made up that term, so let me explain what I mean by that. You had said earlier, you had given the example of creating all these different versions of ancient civilization. So we use the examples of like ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece. So as you let them develop over a time warp period to get to the present day or beyond, are you based on meaning something that was from the past, creating the butterfly effect to see what it turns into and then picking that reality?
I think so. I think there's an element of that. Now, I think it's more like we're pre-visualizing what happens, and then we are picking one of those realities. So there's an interpretation of quantum mechanics that basically says, rather than simply us choosing, the probability wave collapsing for the cat to be alive or dead, there's actually several possible futures. And those futures are sending us back information. Okay, it's almost like so I got interested in this idea, and I wrote a book called The Simulated Multiverse about this idea. If you just look back at how like a chess game is played, an AI chess game, or the first...
Wait, an AI chess game?
Sorry, just a code that's playing chess.
Okay, yeah.
If you just think of there's an algorithm called the Minimax algorithm. This is a really simple one. In fact, we could bring up just a little diagram. There's tons of diagrams out there. But the basic idea is that what these chess-playing computers would do is they would basically try out several moves and say, okay, what's the most likely scenario? If I do this move, what's that guy going to do? The one on the left.
Yeah, so they're taking permutation.
Yeah.
They're taking all kinds of permutations of past moves.
Yeah, but they're also trying to project forward and say, what would happen?
Sure.
Am I going to win
Sure.
in this scenario? Am I going to win in that scenario? And there's this idea of a fitness function that's or some type of function that says, how good is scenario X or Y 10 moves down? And so you can tweak those parameters to try to get the game to choose. Like if it's 50 moves down, it has to keep track of a heck of a lot more data, right? But if it's just the simplest expression is, what is the next best move for me? But that's not as good as going out 2 moves ahead.
Sure.
Because you can test out multiple scenarios. And I wonder if the simulation isn't doing that, where at a civilizational level or even at a personal level, we are branching out different possibilities to try them out. And then we are then picking the one that is the most appropriate. Now I'm using that in quotes because it's hard to define what is the most appropriate. It depends on the nature of the simulation, the nature of our roles. It could be what's best for one person is not best for another person. So you may have different conflicting types of fitness functions or appropriateness functions. But the basic idea is I think we could be in a situation where multiple timelines have played out. And that also is what leads us into this sense of deja vu. So getting back to what I was saying is, in this interpretation of quantum mechanics, if these futures are sending back messages to us, how's that possible unless they exist? Like, how could they
all of them?
Well, let's say 3 of them. Let's say there's 3 of them, right?
But that's where you lose me. How do 3... Because then there are 3, to think of it like decision trees, there's 3 potential decision trees, and there's only one that technically would tie back, right? Because there's only one that ends up happening unless it's a multiverse scenario where they all happen.
Yeah, and so my point of simulated multiverse was exactly that, where
yeah. Okay.
In a multiverse, the way that it's normally defined, so the multiverse is a second interpretation of the quantum indeterminacy in the observer effect. And what they say in the multiverse, and people know about this because of superhero movies, which have different versions of Batman and different versions of Superman, and Spider-Man being one of the better. I think the animated Spider-Man is probably one of the better multiverse movies, I think. But in that scenario, it's branching off. The world is actually branching off into multiple universes, and this is one of the reasons why some scientists don't like the multiverse idea. They're like, okay, how can that be happening? How can we have that many universes just branching off? It doesn't seem parsimonious. It's like it's just wasting resources. But if it's a simulated multiverse, then it's a much easier scenario to buy, I think, because what you're doing is you're not cloning the whole physical universe. You're just cloning information. You're just basically branching off. And information cloning is much easier than like cloning a whole planet. Like, can we clone? I mean, we can clone something really small, but we can't clone something really big. It takes time, even in nature, even if it's the same genetics, it takes time to like grow something. But
don't tell Ben Lamb that.
That's right. He was the direwolf guy, right?
That's right. He was in that seat a couple months ago.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Yeah.
But he still had to grow that wool. Like, it didn't start off as an adult clone of a
it's a
wolf.
woolly rat right now. But
oh, is it? Okay, yeah.
They're working on the woolly mammoth.
Yeah, they're working on getting it up there. Well, that's pretty interesting. But it's very easy to clone information. In fact, most computer processors, they have a command at the low level called clone the bits of information. And so it's much easier to try out different scenarios and to have a multiverse just means you're trying this, now you're trying that, and you're trying that. But you can also prune the tree in a simulated scenario. You don't have to go through all possible scenarios everywhere. So you can get rid of this parsimonious idea. Like scientists like things to be parsimonious, which basically means they don't want to waste a lot of resources.
Sure.
But many scientists do agree on the multiverse idea. Many don't like it. So you have this kind of, fight going on whether that's a realistic idea or not. But in a simulated multiverse, you can have a branch, and based upon the observers or who are watching the simulations, they can prune certain branches so that it's not infinite. Physicists love infinity. Okay, physicists always like to talk about, that's just infinite. It just goes on for infinity. Computer scientists, we hate infinity because we know we don't have infinite resources. We don't have infinite time. We don't have infinite memory. And so what we do is we try to optimize. And so a lot of my conclusions about us, the physical world being a simulation, are based upon things that look like optimizations. To me, having built video games and having written code. And this is one of those where what it means to clone a universe is all you're doing is you're running a different scenario and then you're coming back and now you're running this scenario. So it's very possible. And we talked about Philip K. Dick, but I don't know if I told you the story.
We talked a lot about him.
Did we talk about the JFK scenario?
We talked a lot about Man in the High Castle. We also watched the video that you referenced earlier where he talked about fragmentation and how then he was able to get all those memories. And we talked about multiple ones of his book. I don't think we talked on camera about the JFK thing.
So this is interesting because what we talked about with respect to the Man in the High Castle was that a real timeline when Germany and Japan won the war, World War II?
Yeah, just as a refresher for people, Man in the High Castle, if you have not seen the TV show, which is based on Philip K. Dick, it's the idea that what you just said, Nazis won World War II along with Japan, and so they have now colonized much of the world, including the United States. Japan controls the West, Nazis control the East, but there's a small group of people within the United States who have access to these reels that show the Allies winning the war, which is an ultimate other scenario of the multiverse that we actually exist in here, but that they're trying to make true in their warped reality. But please continue.
Right. So they're seeing a different timeline, basically, in these reels. And then there's a guy that can actually travel. So that's spoiler alert, at least at the end of season 1. But it's interesting because when I interviewed his wife, Philip K. Dick's wife, Tessa, who's still around, she's much older now, but she told me that he came to believe that was a real timeline, the Germany and Japan winning the war timeline. And I mentioned it earlier when I talked about fragmentary memories versus getting the full memories. But she said that in his case, the simulators that he was communicating with, who are supposedly changing variables, also said that they prevented the JFK assassination in Dallas. But then what happened in the next timeline was he got assassinated in Orlando. And then if they tried to change that, he got assassinated somewhere else. Or the timeline just led to a worse outcome, meaning it led to like a nuclear war type scenario. And so they're back to this timeline. So we almost have this idea of a consensus, what Philip K. Dick called a consensus gentium reality, right? Most of us remember one timeline, but some people remember little bits and pieces of other timelines. This touches on the Mandela effect, which we spent a little bit of time on last time. But it's interesting that that's a way to describe, this idea of trying out multiple things. It's possible that we are currently only on one branch, right? This is a branch that's also being tried out to see where it will end up. And perhaps this branch will be reset at some point in the future because reset? Meaning, like, what we think of as history we might wake up one day and think something else happened, like the Soviet Union didn't collapse in 1989, or the World War II scenario, or JFK didn't, because we think the past is fixed, right? But the delayed choice experiment, the delayed double slit delayed choice experiment by John Wheeler, who's one of my favorite physicists, shows us that when the probability wave collapses, what happens is we're not just choosing the current moment, but we're choosing from one of multiple possible pasts. Okay, that sounds weird, doesn't it? I mean, that sounds ridiculous.
Yes, please extrapolate.
Okay, so let's bring up the cosmic delayed choice experiment. And this is really weird. So if quantum mechanics is weird, this is like really weird. And I'll show you how this ties to video games, which I think will make it easier for people to understand. But let's see.
That one on the left?
Yeah, let's go to, let's get a different one that shows Earth. Just go to images.
The second one?
No, the one on the bottom left, which has sorry, where did it go?
Go back.
No,
go back,
back.
Joe. Sorry. The yellow line.
Yeah, the yellow one. Yeah, let's go to the yellow line one, because I think that's perhaps an easier.
Can we
easier
blow
way to
that up,
explain it.
Joe?
Or how about the one on the right, the bottom right?
Right there?
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right.
Okay.
Let's blow that up and let Riz cook.
Okay, so this is one of the hardest concepts to understand, and one of the most mind-blowing, because if the simulation hypothesis says physical space is not what we think it is, but also time is not what we think it is, and that's what this experiment, when Wheeler conceived it, and he worked at Princeton, he had an office across from Einstein, he coined the phrase "it from bit." I'm sure we talked about that last time.
We talked about that in the first hour last time.
So let's suppose there was an object that's really far away, like 1 billion light years away. That's that object on the upper right there. Let's say
so the little sun-looking thing.
Yeah, it's like a sun-looking thing, but it's so far away. And it's sending out light, and then suppose we're down here on Earth, on the bottom left, and we have these two telescopes. And the telescopes can figure out, you see the galaxy in the middle, or whatever that object is in the middle. It could be a black hole, it could be a galaxy. That the light has to go either to the left or to the right of that galaxy before it gets here. Now, in this picture, you can look, and it looks like it's closer to the source than it is to Earth, right? So if that is 1 billion light years away, let's suppose that is, 300 million light years from that, so 700 million light years. 700 million years from here and 700 million light years from here. Okay, or let's just put it in the middle. It's much simpler to understand.
Okay.
Let's suppose it's right in the middle. So the light has to go around that galaxy, and the decision of whether to go to the left or to the right would have had to have been made 500 million years ago, 500 million years ago.
Because of the time passing between us being able to...
Yeah, to get it. To get here, it takes 500 million years. Yep. So it's kind of like saying something happened in 1900, it had to be 125 years ago, because that's kind of when it happened. But because we know the speed of light is fixed, and that's what light years are, it's the amount of time it takes light to go a year, that's about how far away it would have to be, which is also how long ago that decision would have had to have been made. But what the delayed choice experiment is showing us is that when the light is measured here by the telescope, it's only then that the decision is made about whether the light went to the left or to the right. So that's weird, because it's basically saying the light is in a state of superposition, meaning there's two possible histories. Mm-hmm. There's a history where it went left, and there's a history that it went right. And it should have been done back in the days of the dinosaurs, is when the decision should be made. But what this experiment is showing us is that the decision is made when we measure it, now. So we're in fact choosing from one of several possible pasts. Okay, that's very strange. So that's what I was getting at when I said this branch could have been just a branch later on. We might wake up one day and realize there was a different timeline.
But that would require things that we have the way we understand history is also the way that gatekeepers are able to control some things to show us what it is. Okay? But that also means that some things that we have quite literally seen with our own eyes, that no gatekeeper could stop us from seeing. You're saying that one day we could wake up and it could be like, oh, we didn't see that. We saw something else. So the Berlin Wall never came down. It's still standing there.
And that's what I think the Mandela effect could be. It's a useful way to think about this idea.
But isn't it objectively not there right now? The Berlin Wall is gone.
Yeah, it's not there right now. Absolutely.
But you're saying I could wake up 10 years from now and it would be there and it was never gone.
I'm saying that is a possibility.
Okay.
But if that happened, you would remember the Berlin Wall as having gone down, but it would still be there. So I'm saying maybe there's somebody today who is remembering like Tiananmen Square. So this is we went
you
through
and
that.
me are on the there's something going on with our simulations.
Yeah.
We're picturing the same things.
Tank Boy is one of the big Mandela effects.
Yep.
And I remember I watched it on TV at the time where the guy was standing.
Did you?
Yeah, I watched it on the news back then.
I know,
it wasn't
but
real
did you?
time. But did I really?
Something else?
Exactly. Did I really see it or not? Well, because I thought, like many people, that the tank, came and the guy went back. And you can bring it up for those who don't remember this Tank Boy. And so the question I always ask people is, did the tank run him over or not? Did he survive? And what I remember is, I think what the majority of people remember who saw it, which is that the tank went this way and he went and stepped in front of it, but it didn't run him over. Like he survived that encounter. Yeah, this is the guy right here. It was just some guy during the Tiananmen Square protest in China, and they sent in the
Which
military.
never happened. If you go on TikTok, it never happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
According
I don't
to
know
TikTok.
if that's still a thing.
Well, TikTok is still around, right? Yeah. You can still get in there. But there are people who remember the tank running over the guy. That's the interesting thing.
Yes.
And they say it's the bloodiest thing they ever saw on TV. And so how do we explain that? And we can't. We can either say it's bad memory, which I think is easier to do. And anyway, I get more into this in my other book, The Simulated Multiverse. But I think it's a great way to think about this idea. And turns out one of the fathers of quantum mechanics is a guy named Erwin Schrödinger. Schrödinger's cat is the name. In fact, he came up with the experiment because he hated the idea that the cat could be both alive and dead. He said, that's ridiculous. How can the cat be both alive or dead? And yet, that's what the interpretation came out to. But he actually gave an obscure speech back in the 1940s that I was able to uncover when I was looking into these timelines, where he said, we would, in fact, not just be choosing from several states of superposition, we would be choosing from one of several simultaneous histories, right? Which would mean, so not only are you choosing whether the cat is alive or dead, you're choosing whether the cat came in through the front door or it came in through the kitchen. And before it came in the front door, was it out in the street or was it sitting?
You're controlling every possible butterfly effect, effectively.
You're selecting it in a way. So physicists don't like to, they like to say, you're not really changing the past. Okay. But you're selecting a different past.
That sounds like a cop-out.
It is weird,
You're not
right?
changing the past.
You're selecting a past. Now, then we get into these questions of consensus reality. Are we all selecting? And once we've all selected it, it stays, right? So in computer science, once you can cache a value and multiple people will see that value and it's still there. So there's this idea that once we've all selected it, it's pretty stable. But how would we know? And these are, I think, big metaphysical questions.
I'll say.
Yeah. But it's fun to think about sometimes, I think.
It is. It is. You and I last time got a little bit into talking about how some of this stuff could relate to aliens, or just to keep it simple, things that aren't of this earth, regardless of what biological type they may be. And, since speaking with you, I've had some of my own experiences on and off camera that just piss me off about this stuff, because to be clear,
about aliens?
Yes. Yes. When I go to look at the mathematical probability of intelligent life in the universe, it has to be there. I mean, I've had this argument with Brian Keating and other guys before who are like, well, it doesn't have to. There is a possibility it's not. But to me, the chances are so minuscule because of even the vast amount we know from things like the James Webb Telescope, and then what we don't know that exists far beyond that, beyond even our comprehension. So I have no doubt it's out there. But then the physics of whether or not they've been here or what type of advancements they have, this is where it gets into the, hey, anybody's guess, anybody's game. And I'm not one of these guys that's like, I want to believe like there's been a UFO that landed on the White House lawn. Like I'm into data. I'm into, I am into good stories, but where can we find a shred of evidence that shows that? And to me, if there were some sort of connection beyond this realm that could be part of the simulation theory that has to do with aliens, or it could be something separate as well, then there are governments that would probably know about it. And what I've really run into that's very frustrating for me is that there was a podcast I recorded shortly after I recorded with you last time that came out before yours. It was episode 266 and 267, but I had my friend James Fox in here. And then I
think I saw this.
He brought in Jason Sands with him. And nothing against Jason Sands personally. Really nice guy. It was nice to talk with him off camera. He served in the military for a long time. I thought he was a good dude. But to Jason's credit, he talked about all of the severe PTSD and mental health problems that has caused him. And when you listen to the stories he tells, I'll give my friend Darcy Weir some credit on this one. He was onto it on day one. It's literally like lifted from Gaia. Like, remember in Step Brothers where he's in the interview and he starts talking about his life, like living in Boston and solving equations on a board? Oh, you haven't seen this?
Do you mean Step Brothers, or was that in Good Will Hunting?
That's exactly the joke.
Okay.
So John C. Reilly is going to a janitor interview in Step Brothers in a suit. And he starts telling a story, and the interviewer is like, is this the plot to Good Will Hunting? And he's like, no. And he keeps going. And then they're like, I'm pretty sure this is the plot to Good Will Hunting. Yes. Like, that's kind of what happened there. And the reason it really warped me is because...
You mean, so the story that this guy,
Jason was telling me, it's basically lifted from Gaia. That's all bullshit. Was proven, it's 6 Ways to Sunday that's bullshit. And the guys that gave Jason and said, you should look at this, are guys who have given stuff that's very interesting to me, evidence in the past, vis-a-vis, like from the government, related to aliens. And to me, it's created a bit of a House of Cards scenario where I'm like, if they just gave him Jason, what the fuck else are they giving us here?
Right.
So
is it all BS?
So we'll look at this in a couple different layers, but let's start here. If the government does know this stuff, and they're sending out people to talk to people like me or, other people who have platforms, is anything that they agree to release publicly most likely bullshit?
Are you asking my opinion?
Yeah, your opinion.
Well, my experience comes both from people that are in the public eye and then people that are not in the public eye, right? So, people come to me oftentimes in confidence. They don't want the story to be told, or they don't necessarily want to be identified with them. Right. So I think they're doing like the best lies are ones that have an element of truth to them or a kernel of truth. And so I think you may be seeing some element of disinformation or misinformation. I always forget the definition of those two.
I always treat them like the same thing.
Yeah, that's sort of what I do. Yeah, they're technically slightly different, but I always treat them the same. But basically, they're taking something that has an element or kernel of truth, and then they're embellishing it in such a way that it becomes easy to disprove the big story, right? Like the people who were talking about there's a Space Force, there's all this stuff. Like that stuff, I think is easier to disprove than, a group of people had a sighting of a metallic craft. I mean, that's not at all unusual. In fact, I've talked to so many people that have looked up and they tell me they saw something that was solid metal in the daytime, in the middle of the day at 3 p.m. with blue skies. The chances that they're wrong about that are very low. Now, they saw something. The question is, what did they see?
That's right.
I think personally, I would say I'm about 95% sure that there were reverse engineering programs in at least one of these major aerospace companies. Pick the ones we know about. Lockheed Aerospace, the Aerospace Corp, Northrop Grumman, right? All
if that were real, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I just want to know.
Yeah.
Like, what are they saying about it that's like real versus not?
Because I met people who've worked in these companies, and they said, so at the very least, I believe these companies received materials, quote unquote materials, that they were trying to reverse engineer that were very advanced. That doesn't mean they received an entire UFO craft, a working craft. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. I don't have confirmation of a full working craft. What I do have confirmation of is materials. The materials could be a piece of a hull, could be a whole craft, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I'm pretty confident that people are seeing things, and I'm pretty confident that we're trying to analyze something. That said, I also come to the conclusion that there are so many different aspects of this phenomenon. Some of them may be the standard extraterrestrial. Some of them may be more like these beings that have been around all along. Like in the Middle Eastern traditions, we have the jinn. And Jacques Vallée goes into this in his work, like Passport to Magonia. He's using some of the mythology from France and the British Isles and European mythology. But you have this in other parts of the world where they have these other beings, many of whom are sort of smaller and that exist, that can see us, but we can't see them. Mm-hmm. And then they can appear. So I also think there's an interesting aspect to this. Whether they're alien or not, what we're seeing are actual avatars of the beings themselves.
Avatars of them.
Yeah. So, Gary Nolan used this term recently in an interview talking about, are the beings that people are seeing are avatars? Now, he was using them in the context of the film. If you've seen the film Avatar, you have a physical body that's being controlled by somebody here. So still the same basic idea, right? In this case, it's a physical body. Of course, if we're in a simulation, then it's all virtual anyway, so it doesn't matter. But we're seeing a projection of these beings, and it's being controlled from this other dimension. To me, that's an interesting theory because it meets some of the guidelines of stories that people have been reporting for generations, of people coming through walls and being able to silence them using a secret wand, for example, paralyze them that way, and then take them into the world of the Fae in the British Isles or the world of the Jinn, and do all of these things. So that's another element. So I guess, I've kind of gotten a little far afield from, I think, your original question.
No, it's okay. Keep going.
But I think that's an interesting element to explore, is that we are seeing beings that could have their own version of the simulation, or they could be actually here, we just can't see them. So it's very possible in a video game, you can have people there that can see you on their screen, but you can't see them. So we do this in video games all the time, depending on, who has what capabilities, or what, like a super user might be able to see everything that's there. But your ordinary users, which is like us, we can only see things at certain times if they want us to see these things. And this ties to all kinds of high strangeness.
If they want us to see things.
What I've heard Jacques say was that he didn't meet Spielberg until the film was well along. And he said the one thing he objected to was he presents it purely as an alien phenomenon and doesn't consider the other possibilities, that we are seeing things that are there, they're real, but they're not necessarily extraterrestrial. They could be from somewhere else.
From somewhere else?
Meaning they could be interdimensional beings, like I talked about with the Jinn,
like future
or the Fae.
Humans and stuff.
They could be
like
future
that.
humans.
Yeah.
They could be. There's all these other theories that go beyond the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or that they've been here all along. That's another hypothesis: is that the crypto-terrestrial or the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, they've been here all. But what he said was,
hold on, I'm sorry to cut you off, but when you say "been here all along," meaning
been on Earth,
quite literally walking among us, or just been on Earth where we can't see them?
Well, there's different flavors of the theories. So these are theories, right? There's the Silurian hypothesis. Have you ever heard that term?
No.
It comes from Doctor Who. So in Doctor Who, which is British sci-fi series, there's this race of these reptilian type beings who were on Earth like 100 million years ago, like a long time ago, and they've been in hibernation for like millions of years. And he goes down and he finds them, and they're in this giant cavern, and then one of them wakes up, and they're saying, well, we went into hibernation for so long because of something. I forget what the reason was. But the idea is that they were native to Earth before we were here. And that is a theory that is interesting because when you look at the beings, they all appear very similar, kind of very humanoid, right? They seem closer to us than you might expect. Like there's a movie coming out, Project Hail Mary, right?
Project Hail Mary,
which is by it was a book written by Andy Weir, the guy who wrote The Martian. And if you read that book, he encounters an alien, and the alien looks like a spider or something. Like he doesn't look human, right? It's weirder, and so a lot of scientists say, well, they try to dismiss the UFO, especially the beings when beings are encountered, aspect of UFOs by saying, well, why would they look anything like us if they were really from another planet? That they might have evolved in such a different way.
For sure.
And when people talk about abductions and hybrids, okay, that means they would have to be pretty close to us genetically for there to be hybrids.
But this is also where you can get into the game of semantics, and fairly so. I've talked about this before on a lot of different podcasts with people, but like if you just get down to the definition of the word alien, right? If I were going to way oversimplify it, but to be fair, it's like not off. It means something that's not of this earth, meaning something that's also, I would extend that to, not of the earth and the reality and time in which we live. And the example I've always cited as like a first layer of this would be Matthew McConaughey's character in Interstellar. I may have told you this one last time, but just to rehash for people who didn't hear episode 274, Matthew McConaughey leaves Earth aged 45 or whatever in Interstellar. He comes back 80 years later, where it's only been, whatever it was, a year for him or something like that, maybe less.
Right.
And so he is a 46-year-old man coming back into a world where no one that was his same age exists anywhere near that at that point. It's all new people. There's a lot of new people that have been born that are completely of a different reality, and the world is totally different. So I have always posited, and I may not be correct, I'm just some fucking guy who hosts a podcast, but I've always posited that he's technically an alien. So when Jacques Vallée is righteously so saying to Steven Spielberg, hey, we got to consider some other possibilities here, to me, a lot of those other possibilities that he's considering, be it interdimensional beings, future beings, beings that have been here all along but not living within the reality that we live in America or in any country around the world, they're still a form of alien.
They're still a form of alien, but they're not necessarily the extraterrestrial alien the way that we think. And so where I was going with that Close Encounters thing is, I think because it was so successful, on the one hand, it opened a lot of minds that there may be something weird going on. But it also limited the thinking of, at least within the public, that these things have to be extraterrestrial. Like in the 50s, when they talked about aliens, they have to be from Mars or Venus. Right? That's just kind of because they understood Mars and Venus. Therefore, it fit into the paradigm that they could understand. Like if you look at the contactees in the 50s, like Adamski and all these crazy stories that you hear back then. And he said, where are you from? And they said, we're from Venus. Now, what if they needed to explain to him where they're from? And, if they said that we're from the multiverse or we're time travelers, they wouldn't have really understood it. And so they said they're from Venus. And so the whole idea of little green men from Mars became kind of a trope, if you will, for that time. I mean, now we know there are exoplanets on other star systems. So the explanation is, they must be from another star system, right? At least the explanation that the media wants to talk about. Like I remember I wrote an article for NBC News a few years ago, so mainstream media outlet, about...
you sell out. Damn it, Riz.
That's right. Well, this is interesting.
We could trust you.
Well, the title of the article was...
I'm kidding with you.
Yeah, no, I know you are.
You're
But the title of the article was, the government takes UFOs seriously. Why doesn't Silicon Valley or academia? And at one point I wanted to say, well, okay, yes, if they're physical craft, then there may be some technology here. We should try to learn what it is. But I also wanted to explore these other possibilities like time travel, interdimensional, here all along types of things. And the editors were like, no, that's too complicated. We got to cut that because there's not enough room. People won't get it. And I realized that when the media frames UFOs, they're always framing it as, extraterrestrial or it's just secret programs. That's it. In fact, I had one tell me, I think it was Discovery Channel, there was a show and they called me up and said, maybe we want to interview you. What do you think they are? And I said, well, I don't think they may not be extraterrestrial and they may not be, just nothing. They're like, no, that's not what we wanted. Right. And so they didn't interview me for the show because they wanted people who were going to say they're aliens. And then
they had a narrative?
Yeah, they had it. Exactly. Narrative? Funny how that works, right?
That's
all the media, right?
That never happens. I've never heard of that.
Never. Yeah, me neither, right? But it's almost like the science fiction is influencing how we think about this. And it's also possible they're telling us, like if you had to go and explain to somebody, to a civilization that didn't know about other planets where you're from, what would you say? In Star Trek, they have the Prime Directive, and they end up often going into these planets, and they end up disguising themselves. But some people always see stuff, right? Some people see the little shuttlecraft that they came down in, or they saw them beaming in, materializing out of nowhere, and they have to come up with some lies. They say, we're from over there, the other side of the planet, right? So they have to come up with something that people can understand. So I wonder if there's a narrative, cultural narratives that's affecting how we interpret something that I think is a real phenomenon. Just like I was saying with the religious, if 1,000 people have been to China and say there's, something there, okay, they may be describing different parts of China. In some places it's warm and with beaches, and in another place it's like huge skyscrapers, or in other places it's, mountains, and in other places it's the desert. But if enough people there's enough commonalities, you can start to piece together that something is happening here. So the question is what? My personal opinion, right, is just that I think there is something real, and that they're adding disinformation narratives on top of it, in order to make it easily dismissible.
I think you're probably spot on there, and I think a lot of it's working because you can take anything these days and make it a religion, and those people who may want to drive that narrative, be them from government, people that work with government, whatever it might be. I think they have successfully, unfortunately, been able to do that with a lot of people, because a lot of people have tied their meaning of life to, Pentagon leaks about aliens. And it's like, you got to be open to all of it, including what may be total bullshit. It doesn't mean that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because someone's story turns out to be complete provable bullshit, it doesn't mean, therefore, there's no such thing as an alien. But I think people have gotten that tied together in their head the wrong way. And then, like you've just been saying the last 5-10 minutes, there's people like you who are looking at this from like, all right, no. Like, there's shit out there that seems to exist, and I'll get with that. But also, what is it doing? Is it running our simulation?
Right.
Whatever it is. Are they of this earth and running this simulation seemingly from somewhere else, but they're actually here?
Yeah.
Like, not to be like the hippie pot smoking, let's think about all the possibilities guy, but let's think about all the possibilities and like do it from some sort of actual, as best you can with a hypothetical scientific method, as you are trying to do, making your hypothesis based on actual evidence here. And you had said this very early on, and I think this is a good spot to come back around to it to kind of tie this all together. But you said when you first wrote this book in 2019, you had it at statistically maybe like a 50% possibility.
Yeah, like even, if we can't tell if the real world is real or not, then it's about a 50-50 chance.
Okay.
But also I felt like we were 50% of the way to be able to produce these fully immersive simulations ourselves.
Okay.
Now we're a lot further along.
What percentage do you put it on?
I'd say it's at least 70% now.
Now, what do you base? So let's start with the 50 and then work your way to the 70. What did you base that 50 off of? Like how, whether it's 51 or 52 or 48, whatever it was. Like how did you say, here's the number, this is how I got there?
Well, so there's a methodical way, and then there's a bit of intuition that I'm adding onto it as well. And I think the methodical way, like in the book, I describe these 10 stages of technology that are that we would have to build in order to build fully realistic simulations. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mentioned at the beginning, the simulation point. So I said, how far along are we in being able to build all of those things that I talked about? And I felt like we were close to halfway there.
Got it.
And if we can get there, then probably somebody may already have gotten there, and we may be inside one of their simulations.
And it would prove it if you got there.
if we can do it,
it would successfully say, yes, it's a simulation.
Well, no, it wouldn't prove it. It would at least say it's very possible. Because right now people are like, that's not even possible to build a simulation that looks like the real world. And so it would make it so that if we can build a simulation with people in there who think it's real, then the chances that we're in a simulation just went up significantly. Because if it's impossible to do, then nobody could have done it, maybe. That's sort of where the argument is coming from, you know.
All right, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, so let me just translate something. You tell me how wrong I am. Were you saying that you were 50% sure that it was possible that a simulation could exist, and you're now, whatever it is, 70% sure? And if you get to 100%, you are 100% sure that it's possible, but not 100% sure that it actually exists?
Yeah, so this is where we have to tie back to Bostrom's argument. Remember, I was saying the argument that Elon Musk used that said the chances we're in base reality is 1 in a billion. So if it's possible, then whoever got there is going to build lots of simulated worlds. And then there's only one physical world. There's a lot of simulated worlds. Which one are we in? Are we in a physical world or simulated world? It's like 99% at that point, right? 99.99% likely that we'd be in a simulation. That's where that kind of original argument came from. That said, I was also relying on the fact that quantum physics is telling us that the world isn't real. And so if it's a simulated virtual reality, then I think that starts to make more sense. And then I was also using intuition on how the mystics have all been telling us the same thing, and I think it's unlikely. So that's what made me say it's more than 50% back then. So the 50% was based more on technological progress. That's kind of how I was getting there. Now I'm saying we're probably 70% of the way there, and if we get to 100%, then it's 99.99% likely that we're in a simulation.
And does the simulation, if this is way too broad to ask this, so try to bring this back to Earth if you can. But if you are able to prove that and get to that 99.9%, does that then prove that AI is a part of, how do I want to ask this? AI is definitely a part of the bootloader to that simulation?
I think so.
Yeah.
It shows that AI has been used to create a world and probably has been used to create the physical world. And
the whole physical world.
The whole physical world is probably, because if you think of the vast numbers, going back to the example of No Man's Sky and 18 quintillion planets, and going back to your point earlier about statistically, it's pretty likely there's life out there. Why? Because there's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, the universe is so large. And so if we live in a simulation, that means that these things are generated on demand, right? So things can, when the players or the simulators need to see something, then it's generated as necessary.
Got it.
So that's the optimization technique that I'm relying on for this idea, that you can basically have the AI. And this actually also ties, and in this book, in the religious section, I added a bit about Genesis, right? Because Genesis is, again, one of those things that we in the academic and technoscientific community dismiss. That's ridiculous, right? God created the world in 6 days. That's like bullshit. Of course he didn't. But maybe. But then you say, okay, what did God do exactly in Genesis? He said, let there be light, and there was light. And then what did he do? He said, let there be this. And then he created this, and then he created that. And what was his mechanism for creating? Then he created the waters, then he created the land, then he created the foliage, then he created the animals, then he created the people. What was the mechanism for that? It was primarily God spoke, and it was created. Okay, now that, if we could view that as a literal thing, which fundamentalists will do, or we could view it as a metaphorical thing to say, is it possible we could speak and then have a world created for us? Guess what? It is now. It wasn't even 2019 when I first wrote this book, because now you can tell AI to create a world, and what does it do? It's like the holodeck in Star Trek.
Yeah.
If you watch the holodeck, how do they program it? They just tell the computer, I'd like to have a street in 20th century Paris and a bar. And in this bar, there should be this woman in this red dress and a bunch of other patrons. And it'll create the NPC character. It'll create everything for you. And there is evidence that our world is algorithmic, that things get created. Like we saw earlier, the images of the short amount of equations that could produce realistic looking things. And even with biology, it looks like it's algorithmic in how it's done. If DNA is just data, I mean, DNA is just data primarily. Something uses that data and it then creates things based off of that data. And that sounds very algorithmic, very machine-oriented, if you will. And so even the biology, as we think of it, is really, you can think of it as an AI machine that is using that information to create things in this world.
It's all a closed circle that ties together.
Yeah.
Riz Virk, this is wild shit. As always, man, it's a lot of fun talking with you. We're gonna have the link to your latest edition of the Simulation Hypothesis down below. So this is out now when people are listening to this. But there's a million other things I really want to dig into there, but we'll be here till probably 10 o'clock tonight. If I do, I know I got to get you out of here.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for doing this once again.
Thank you for having me on again.
Of course.
It looks like we may have to do another one someday.
There will be a round 3.
Okay.
Just as I told you there'd be a round 2. We're going to have a round 3 next year.
Sounds great.
So everyone go check out the book, and we'll see you again soon. All right. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.